Jon Snow had not expected to survive the war against the dead, let alone find himself standing on the edge of a new beginning for the Seven Kingdoms. The ravages of the Great War lingered in the memories of all who had endured it, and the scars cut deep across the land, both in the hearts of its people and in the charred stretches of fields from Winterfell to King's Landing. Yet here he stood, at the threshold of a possibility he never would have chosen for himself. He had grown up believing he was a bastard, a child of no true name or birthright. Now the realm called him its king. The dusty light of dawn stretched across the quiet halls of the Red Keep, where the Iron Throne awaited him like an unspoken challenge, a seat that had been forged in flame and blood by Aegon Targaryen so many centuries past. Few men had ever taken that throne willingly without being devoured by its burdens. Jon, who had spent his life shunning grandeur, had become the man duty thrust forward. He looked about the empty throne room in those early hours, his footsteps echoing over cold marble floors still marked by the destruction visited upon King's Landing. Broken pillars stood in silent testimony to Dragonflame, and a wide fissure ran across the floor where the stone had cracked under the weight of both regal arrogance and unstoppable might. The city was haunted by memories of the day the bells tolled and catastrophe followed. Cinder and ash had rained down like the vengeance of angry gods. Many believed the sight was an omen, a curse upon would-be rulers. Jon's eyes traveled to the scattered shards of melted swords embedded in the Iron Throne. The swords of those once vanquished, hammered into a seat meant to proclaim dominion over the realm. He did not yearn for dominion nor for power, but there it was, calling him by the name his blood demanded he bear. Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name, if one counted the line unbroken since Aegon the Conqueror. But so many had died for this throne, too many. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, when ghosts of the past came calling, he still heard the echo of his blade slicing through the crisp, frigid air as he fought the undead at the long night's fiercest hour. He recalled the purple bruises of exhaustion beneath Arya's eyes, the determined clench of Sansa's jaw, and the roar of the dragons overhead. He was haunted by the memory of Daenerys's tears when she spoke of breaking the wheel, and the madness that claimed her when she saw no other path to her dream of a new world. He recalled, too, that moment in which duty overcame love, when the steel of his dagger slid between her ribs, and in her dying gasp, he saw all the shattered hopes of a better future. He had not wanted it. He had never wanted to take her life, but in that moment he believed he must. Duty was a stark blade, and he had cut deep, a betrayal with no going back. Now the world had turned on its axis once more, concluding in the strangest twist of all. The lords of the Seven Kingdoms had gathered in a war-torn dragon pit and, after fierce debate and uncertain compromise, had turned to him. Tyrion Lannister, shackled and unkempt, had pleaded with them to think of the greater good, to choose a leader who did not lust for the throne but who knew the burdens of leadership. Somehow, in the chaos that followed, the battered realm had decided upon Jon Snow, the last Targaryen, if the rumors of his parentage were to be believed, which they were after the surviving members of House Stark quietly confirmed the truth. He had wanted none of it. He only wanted to live a life of quiet honor, as a watchman on the wall if need be, or to find his peace in anonymity. Yet the realm was in crisis, and the lords and ladies felt their best chance of survival lay in crowning a man who had no thirst for power. He felt the burn of memory deep in his chest as dawn's light shifted, filtering through the shattered windows. Grey Worm and the Unsullied had departed after the war. The Dothraki horde, leaderless and restless, had drifted off in search of new conquests across the narrow sea. The North remained battered but loyal to him. The Reach, left in disarray, held its breath, uncertain of how to rebuild but eager to see a stable hand guide them. Dorne watched from a distance, always proud and stubborn, but there was a glimmer of reluctant acceptance in the letters from its new leadership. The Vale, ever cautious, recognized the importance of forging alliances. The Riverlands, Stormlands, and Westerlands each carried their own set of grievances, hopeful that this new king could bind the wounds that had bled the realm for so long. Jon swallowed hard as he ascended the steps to the Iron Throne for the first time. In his mind, the image of Ned Stark rose up to greet him, his foster father's stern kindness, the empathy in his eyes. The memory brought him a sense of calm he had not expected. This was not how Ned's story ended, nor was it a place Ned would ever have sought for himself. Yet perhaps in this odd arrangement of fate, Ned's values were about to guide the realm at last. He did not seat himself that day. Instead, he stood before the throne, gloved hands closing into fists at his sides as he stared at the twisted metal. He was not a man who liked the idea of bending others to his will, nor did he wish to hold the threat of dragon fire over them. Even if the last surviving dragon, Drogon, had carried Daenerys's body away into the unknown, one monstrous serpent might yet be roaming the skies, unpredictable in its grief. Was he supposed to claim that living flame as part of his rule? A soft voice broke the silence. "Your Grace." He turned. Davos Seaworth, older and more careworn than ever, stood in the archway. The Onion Knight bowed his head in a manner that suggested respect and deep worry all at once. Jon realized then that he would need loyal counsel. He would need Davos's guidance, Tyrion's cunning. If Tyrion could be convinced that he deserved a role after all he had done, and men and women like Brienne of Tarth, Podrick Payne, Gendry Baratheon, and others who had survived the storms of war, in that single moment he felt a pang of gratitude. He did not stand alone. Jon found his voice quiet but steady. "I'm no king," he said, half to himself and half to Davos. Davos cleared his throat. "You're the king we have. The realm needs a shepherd, not another tyrant. I believe you can be that shepherd even if you don't believe it yet." Jon drew in a slow breath. "Where do we begin?" "There's to be a coronation soon," Davos said. "We'll need to gather the lords to confirm it. The people are uncertain. They hear rumors that a Targaryen sits in the Red Keep again. They remember Dragonfire. We must show them you are not your father or your aunt. Show them the same man who took up the black and strove to protect them from the darkness beyond the wall." An ache twisted Jon's heart. He thought of the wall, of the wildlings who had followed him, of ghosts left behind in the snow. Duty beckoned him to rule now, to mend the wounds of the living, to prevent yet another cycle of senseless bloodshed. He nodded, meeting Davos's eyes. "Then let's do it. Let's try to bring them peace." In the days that followed, King's Landing awoke to the hum of activity. Where once the city had cowered under tyranny, now it observed its new king from windows and doorways, uncertain if it should trust again. Blackened rubble was cleared, and stonemasons began the slow, wearying effort of repairs. Refugees from the burned districts set up shelters wherever they could. Highborn and lowborn alike struggled to find a semblance of order. War had made the people suspicious, jaded, and broken. They had cheered at Joffrey's wedding once, they had cheered at Tommen's coronation, they had cheered at Cersei's triumph. Most recently, many had hailed Daenerys as a liberator only to watch her burn the city. Now they had no cheers left, only a guarded caution. Jon Snow did not don the elaborate finery of a king. He walked among the people in simple black and gray garments, wearing thick boots that had once trod the snows of the north. A single emblem marked his station, the sigil that blended Stark and Targaryen, a dire wolf and a dragon entwined. He was a symbol of unity, in theory, someone who might reconcile the north with the rest of the realm. Yet every step he took in the city reminded him of the cost of this unity, a cost measured in thousands of lives. He held court in a scorched courtyard for lack of a better place. The throne room was still largely in disrepair and weighted with too much bitter history. The lords who arrived, some with retinues, others alone, bowed stiffly, pronouncing their fealty. Ser Bronn of the Blackwater, newly established as Lord of Highgarden, arrived in a carriage loaded with casks of the Reach's best wine and a self-assured grin. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree before the war's end, came in battered armor with a small entourage of loyal Stormlanders. From the Vale came Yohn Royce, stoic and wary, though he inclined his head respectfully. Edmure Tully emerged from the Riverlands with an entourage that included many who still whispered about the Red Wedding. From Dorne arrived a delegation that wore bright silks, their eyes hidden behind veils of courtesy and caution. Each faction had its hopes and fears pinned on the man who claimed to be Rhaegar Targaryen's son, yet who had been raised by Ned Stark. Every faction hoped their interests would not be neglected. Jon sat on a simple wooden chair, no gold or precious metals adorning it, with Davos at his right hand. Tyrion Lannister, freed from his chains after a lengthy debate among the noble houses, stood to his left. Having killed his father and betrayed his sister, Tyrion was a figure of controversy, but he was also the one man who had shaped the chain of events that led here. Jon, remembering Tyrion's earnest conviction, asked him to serve as Hand of the King. This request was met with outrage by some, cautious acceptance by others. In the end, Jon's quiet insistence that Tyrion's mind was needed and Tyrion's own admission of guilt settled the matter. Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell, was not present. She had elected to remain in the north for the time being, focusing on rebuilding Winterfell and ensuring the north retained its strength. Arya Stark was gone too, sailed west of Westeros to discover what lay beyond the known world, or so the tales said. When all had assembled and the hush of curiosity overtook the courtyard, Jon rose to speak. "My lords and ladies," he began, voice calm but resonant, "I have no illusions about your fears. The last time a Targaryen came to this city, it burned. I wish I could tell you that I have easy answers, that I know how to mend what has been broken. But I don't. All I know is what my father, Lord Eddard Stark, taught me, to be honest, to serve the realm, and to protect the people. The seat of a king is no place for a man who only wants power. And I do not want power. But I believe in duty." He paused to let his words sink in. The crowd waited, hushed. "We will rebuild together as one people. We will make sure no one goes hungry if we have the grain to spare. We will protect those who cannot protect themselves. And we will hold accountable those who would use violence or intrigue to set themselves above the law. My father once said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. I will not hide in a tower while sending others to do my bidding. I will be here, in the open, and if you have grievances, you will be heard." In that moment, a ripple passed through the gathering curiosity, perhaps a flicker of hope. For all his Targaryen blood, Jon wore the bearing of a Stark, reserved, upright, and resolute. If he commanded a dragon, it was nowhere to be seen. If he wore a crown, it was hidden behind the simpler crown of truth he spoke. The courtiers and lords present might have muttered their doubts, but none could deny the earnestness of his tone. The process of rebuilding was slow and fraught with setbacks. The crown's coffers were nearly empty, as war had depleted whatever resources King's Landing once possessed. The Master of Coin, a position Tyrion had temporarily assumed until a more suitable candidate could be found, set about negotiating loans with the Iron Bank of Bravos, a necessary evil that made Jon uneasy. He knew the kingdom needed gold to feed its people and repair its walls, but he hated the idea of plunging it into deeper debt. Still, what choice did he have? Without investment, the city would starve, and houses across the land would resent the crown for not providing relief. Davos employed his practical sense, urging alliances that could supply grain and goods. He brought forward men from the north and the Vale, from the Riverlands and the Reach, to coordinate shipments of food. Jon himself spent hours each day meeting commoners who lined up to speak of their plight. He was no charismatic king, not like Robert Baratheon in his youth or even Aegon the Conqueror in the old tales, but his sincerity and readiness to listen began to soothe the public's wariness. Slowly, rumors spread through the taverns. The new king was a bastard. The new king had fought the dead. The new king had killed his lover for the good of the realm. In the beginning, these rumors were a confused jumble of half-truths, but they became a legend of self-sacrifice that found purchase in the hearts of a people wearied by tyrants. Some days, Jon rose before the sun, plagued by nightmares of the dead tearing through Winterfell or the roar of dragonfire in the streets of King's Landing. He would step outside, leaning on the walls of the Red Keep's ramparts, breathing in the early morning air. The city stretched out below, gray rooftops glinting with the promise of dawn. On such mornings, Tyrion would often find him, bleary-eyed but ready to begin another day's work. "I miss wine that doesn't taste like vinegar," Tyrion muttered one morning, coming to stand beside Jon at the battlements. "Bronn claims to have a store of arbor gold in Highgarden, but he won't let me near it unless I sign away half the crown's budget." Jon managed a faint smile. "We can't afford extravagances." "Not yet." "I know," Tyrion said, though there was a flicker of mischief in his eyes. "How are you feeling about your coronation tomorrow? Ready to stand before the lords and have a fancy metal band placed on your head? I'm sure you're thrilled." Jon exhaled, his breath a white cloud in the cool morning. "I'd rather be out with the stonemasons, helping rebuild. I'd rather be anywhere else, really?" Tyrion chuckled. "And that's why the realm chose you, your grace. You're the reluctant king. The realm always fares better under men who don't crave the crown." Jon shook his head. "I hope you're right. If we fail now after everything that's happened." "Failing is part of learning," Tyrion replied, "and I've done more failing than most. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we must rely on allies who share our goals. Keep men like Davos close, men like Gendry, Brienne, Podrick. They'll help us do what's right, no matter the cost. And hopefully keep us honest along the way." Jon turned, resting a forearm on the cold stone. "I never expected to end up here. I never wanted any of this. But if I have to be king, then I'm going to do it differently. No more backstabbing, no more scheming for the sake of personal glory." Tyrion's lips curved into a wry smile. "Well, there goes half my repertoire." Despite the momentary lightness, the weight of the coming ceremony bore down upon them. The next day, Jon would be crowned publicly, affirming to all Westeros and across the narrow sea that the Targaryen who sat the Iron Throne was a man of the North in spirit, guided by the wisdom of House Stark. Jon dreaded the pomp, but it was a necessary step to unify the realm. When the day of coronation arrived, the skies were a clear, startling blue, as if the gods had decided to grant them a reprieve from the chaos of storms. Large crowds gathered in the courtyard, which had been scrubbed of ash and debris. Soldiers from various houses stood in formation, a small but symbolic testament to unity, though their banners were still tattered and their ranks far from full. Jon wore a simple black doublet embroidered with a subtle design of dire wolf and dragon scales at the shoulders. He refused the elaborate cloak that had been prepared, choosing instead a plain fur-trimmed cloak reminiscent of Winterfell's style. It felt odd to dress for such a ceremony, and he could not help feeling like a fraud, but Davos, Tyrion, and even Brienne insisted on it. The realm needed the spectacle. The High Septon, a sober man chosen from among the Fate's moderate ranks, officiated. There was no great September of Baelor anymore, it had been destroyed in Cersei's wildfire explosion. Instead, they stood beneath the open sky where sunlight illuminated the remnants of columns and shrines that lay in ruins. For once, the High Septon did not offer a litany of hypocrisy and self-importance. He spoke earnestly of rebuilding, of the gods' grace in giving them a chance at peace, and of the need for justice tempered by mercy. When the moment came for Jon to kneel, he felt an uncomfortable shiver. Kingship was not something he desired, and kneeling to accept it felt paradoxical. But he did as tradition demanded. Tyrion stood nearby, the crown in his hands. It was not a relic of Targaryen or Baratheon might. It had been forged anew from the melted scraps of swords left after the wars. Simple in design, slender, and edged in an intertwining pattern that suggested both dragons and dire wolves. Tyrion's voice did not carry with the grandeur of an orator, but it was firm. We gather here today to crown Jon of House Targaryen, known to many as Jon Snow, as our king. By the will of the realm and the blessings of the gods, we entrust him with the responsibilities of justice, defense, and governance in hopes he will not only bear this burden but transform it into a chance for unity. The High Septon took the crown from Tyrion, then placed it gently on Jon's head. May the seven guide you, he said, that you may rule with wisdom, protect with courage, and love with compassion. Jon stood slowly, feeling the cold metal rest against his brow. He faced the crowd, uncertain if he should speak. His mind flitted back to the harsh winter winds of the north, to the vow he once took at Castle Black, the vow that made him swear he would hold no lands and wear no crowns. Yet here he was, crowned before the realm. He gathered his resolve, looking across the sea of faces. Some were anxious, some curious, a few perhaps even hopeful. He sought no applause, no roar of the crowd. But the hush that greeted him felt charged with potential. He spoke softly, but the courtyard was so still that every word carried. I accept this crown not because I desire power, but because we all have a duty to each other. In the wars we fought, we saw the threat that lay beyond the wall. We saw how dragons can be both protectors and destroyers. We saw how houses and families can turn upon each other, tearing the realm apart. That cannot be our future. I will do everything in my power to rebuild this kingdom for the living, for all who call Westeros home. A tentative cheer rose from one corner, soon joined by a smattering of applause from others. It was not the thunderous acclamation that once greeted conquerors and usurpers, but perhaps it was more honest. A battered people, weary of war, offered a cautious acceptance of the man before them. The days after the coronation were a maelstrom of activity. Letters F. flew across the realm, proclaiming the crowning of Jon Targaryen and inviting alliances. Jon delegated tasks to the small council, which was still forming. Tyrion served as hand, Davos as master of ships, though he was more of an advisor on all fronts. Bronn, somewhat to everyone's bemusement, handled finances in the interim as master of coin, but that was a shaky arrangement at best. The position of Master of Laws was tentatively offered to Yohn Royce, who brought the Vale's steady hand to matters of justice. The Master of Whisperers remained vacant, for Varys was gone and no suitable replacement had come forward. It seemed the realm, for once, was content to have fewer whispers in the dark. One of Jon's first official acts was to demand an accurate accounting of the damage wrought upon King's Landing. He wanted to know precisely how many were homeless, how many needed basic supplies, and how many had lost loved ones in the madness of the final battle. The reports that came back were grim: entire districts reduced to rubble, thousands dead, many more wounded, orphans left begging in the streets. Jon allocated funds, what little the crown had, and borrowed from the Iron Bank to purchase food and building materials. Groups of stonemasons, carpenters, and laborers were hired at fair wages. On John's orders, these crews were sent to rebuild not just the Red Keep or the manors of the wealthy but the commoners' homes first. This raised eyebrows among the noble class who were used to the monarchy prioritizing noble estates. But John insisted that for the realm to have faith in its king, he needed to show he cared about all his people. As weeks turned into months, the city's atmosphere began to shift, though challenges remained. Banditry rose in the outskirts of the crownlands as displaced soldiers and outlaws roved in search of plunder. The gold cloaks, once under the purview of men like Janos Slint or the manipulations of Circe, were now reorganized under a new commander who swore loyalty to the crown and justice rather than personal ambition. Enforcement of the king's peace became a slow, painstaking process. John sometimes rode out himself with a contingent of guards to show that the rule of law applied across the land. He could not be everywhere at once, but each appearance reinforced the message that no one was beyond the reach of the king. Beyond King's Landing, other concerns pressed in. Winterfell was slowly recovering, with Sansa Stark distributing resources among northern lords. The Eyrie remained vigilant, sending a small portion of its troops to assist with Crownland security. The Reach, under Bronn's nominal leadership, was a different story. Highgarden's wealth was vast, yet Bronn was known for being a Sel's word at heart, and many of the old Tyrell bannermen looked upon him with skepticism. Jon worried that Bronn's mercurial nature might lead him to exploit the region's resources. Yet Tyrion insisted that despite his flaws, Bronn was loyal to the crown so long as there was profit in it, and the realm needed the grain and gold of the Reach desperately. The Stormlands under Gendry Baratheon proved more reliable, sending shipments of fish, lumber, and fresh recruits for the City Watch. The Westerlands, still reeling from the Lannister family's disgrace, offered only lukewarm support. As for Dorne, it remained distant, though a delegation occasionally traveled to King's Landing to observe the new King's Court. Their stance was neutral, waiting to see how the tides would turn. All the while, Jon's personal life remained as sparse as ever. He had no queen, no children. Gossip flitted about the court. Some wondered if he would seek a northern alliance, perhaps wed some highborn lady from the Vale or the Riverlands to solidify unity. Others whispered that he was too tormented by his past love to consider marrying. Jon paid little mind to such talk, immersed as he was in the kingdom's troubles. He did, however, welcome a friend from the north who arrived unexpectedly, Tormund Giantsbane. The wildling leader brought news that the free folk were settling well in lands beyond the wall, but a new threat loomed in the frozen wastelands. Strange sightings, rumors of monstrous beasts prowling the far north. Tormund joked that Jon had best not forget the real reason the Night's Watch existed. "It's not White Walkers," Tormund assured him in the Great Hall while tearing into a roast that made the courtiers cringe at his lack of manners. "But the free folk have spotted a few strange creatures. Might be nothing. But I thought you ought to know." Jon nodded seriously, pushing aside the official documents cluttering the table. "I appreciate you telling me. If there's any danger up there, we need to be prepared. The Night's Watch is still short-handed after the war." Tormund shrugged, picking at his beard. "We'll handle ourselves. You've got your throne to worry about now, King Crow. But don't forget, winter always returns one way or another." The words struck Jon with an old, familiar chill. Winter always returns. The cycle of seasons in Westeros was unpredictable, but the deeper meaning was clear. Danger, fear, the unknown, they never truly vanished. Even as he tried to build a new order in King's Landing, he could not ignore the possibility that new threats would emerge, that the living might once again have to fight for survival. For now, though, he had the urgent task of keeping Westeros from tearing itself apart. Sensing the delicate balance needed, Jon embarked on a grand progress across the realm. It was a custom he had heard of in old stories, kings traveling to meet the people, to hear their grievances firsthand, to show themselves as more than a distant figure in the Red Keep. The lords of the regions prepared to receive him, uncertain if the new king meant to investigate their doings or simply extend goodwill. Jon made no grand demands. He took a modest retinue: Davos, Tyrion, Brienne, a small guard of knights, and a handful of advisors. They journeyed from King's Landing south to Storm's End, where Gendry welcomed them with an awkward but genuine show of loyalty. The keep's high towers overlooked the sea, battered by winds and waves, but it stood proud. Gendry explained how he had begun rebuilding the shipyards, hoping to create a strong navy for the Stormlands, a navy that could also serve the crown if needed. Jon offered royal funds to help in exchange for a fair arrangement of tariffs that would replenish the crown's coffers over time. Gendry agreed gladly, seeing in Jon a mentor who had once been his friend. They shared a quiet moment in the courtyard, remembering their time at Winterfell, the forging of dragonglass weapons. The night Arya Stark had chosen her own path. There was a pang of loss in that recollection, but also pride in what they had survived. From Storm's End, the king's progress continued inland, cutting through roads that wove around farmland and forest. Commoners lined the paths in some villages, curious to see the king who wore a crown of battered swords. Many had never seen a monarch up close. At one stop, John dismounted his horse to speak with a group of farmers struggling after a recent drought. He promised to arrange for shipments of seeds from the Reach and new irrigation projects if they agreed to share part of their crop with other struggling regions. It was a tentative solution, but it showed them that the crown was not blind to their needs. In another village, they encountered an outbreak of sickness. John insisted on sending for healers and distributing some of the crown's limited supplies of medicine. Tyrion, tallying the costs, grimaced at how quickly expenses mounted, but said nothing. He understood the importance of gestures that built trust. Eventually, John reached Highgarden. He had never been there, nor had he ever expected to lay eyes on the ancestral seat of House Tyrell, now occupied by the Sellsword Bronn. Though much of its grandeur remained, verdant gardens, golden roses blooming in the courtyards, Highgarden felt emptier, as if mourning the loss of its noble line. Bronn greeted John and his retinue with a wry grin, wearing clothes that were more expensive than anything he had ever owned before. He boasted about the castle's vineyards, the gold in its vaults, and the fertility of its lands. It was clear that while Bronn enjoyed the comforts of his newfound lordship, he had also taken steps to ensure the region continued to prosper. The roads were safer, the harvests abundant, and trade routes with the rest of Westeros were slowly reopening. John carefully navigated their conversations, aware that Bronn was a man who respected straightforward talk, but also cunning. Over hearty dinners, they negotiated new trade policies that would see surplus grain distributed north to King's Landing and the Riverlands. In return, Bronn received rights to more shipping lanes through Blackwater Bay and a promise of royal support should any rebellions or pretenders challenge his claim to Highgarden. They sealed the deal with a handshake and a grim chuckle about how neither had imagined themselves in such lofty positions back when Bronn was simply a sword for hire and Jon was a bastard on the wall. The next leg of the journey took them into the Riverlands, where Edmure Tully's leadership had restored a fragile peace. The scars of the War of the Five Kings remained, with many farms abandoned and towns still recovering from raids. Jon listened to harrowing tales of how the Freys had terrorized these lands. He visited the twins, standing in silence for a moment on the very bridge where Robb Stark and Catelyn Stark had once believed they had a future. The memory of the Red Wedding hung like a wraith over those towers. Walder Frey was long dead, but his legacy of treachery stained the stones. Jon chose not to linger, though he issued an edict ensuring that the region's new stewards would operate under close watch. The name Frey had become a curse in the Riverlands, and he had no desire to see it thrive again. In every village and castle, Jon carried the same message: unity, cooperation, and mutual benefit. Houses that had once feuded found themselves unexpectedly working together on shared projects to rebuild roads or restore farmland. Some might have called Jon naive, but each success he found strengthened his position. For the first time in years, the realm sensed an absence of petty rivalries at the highest level. Even those who disliked the crown found it difficult to argue when the king's men came bearing provisions or offering help with reconstruction. By the time the king's progress wound north toward the Vale, months had passed. The fresh air of the Vale's high mountains was a welcome relief after the dusty roads of the southern plains. Yohn Royce greeted them at the Bloody Gate, reaffirming his support while also emphasizing that the Vale's isolation had protected it from the worst of the wars. Castle after castle in the Vale opened its gates with tentative hospitality. Jon made sure to keep his visits brief, not wishing to impose or stoke the lord's fears that the crown sought to meddle too deeply in their affairs. He accepted tributes of grain and supplies but did not demand more than they could spare. In this way, the bonds of trust that had begun with Ned Stark's fostering at the Eyrie were strengthened. As the caravan prepared to travel west, Jon received word that something dire had happened in King's Landing. A raven arrived with the royal seal, carrying frantic messages from Tyrion's steward. It seemed that a group of discontents, former soldiers who had lost everything in the wars, along with some disgruntled nobles, had attempted a coup in the city, preaching that the Targaryen king was not fit to rule, that he was part of the bloodline that had raised the city. They seized control of a few outlying districts and had managed to spark riots in the streets. The Gold Cloaks were holding them at bay, but casualties were mounting. Tyrion was still with Jon in the Vale, so the city's defense had fallen to the commander of the city watch in Davos, who had returned earlier to oversee shipments. Jon's heart lurched. He had been so focused on forging alliances that he had not anticipated the resentment festering at home. Without delay, he and his retinue rode hard for King's Landing. Days of weary travel passed, with each mile amplifying the tension in Jon's chest. By the time they reached the city's gates, they found them guarded by watchmen who recognized the king and immediately let him through. Inside, the streets were on edge. Barricades of overturned carts and debris blocked certain neighborhoods. Smoke from fires drifted in the air, and a sour stench lingered, a mix of sweat, fear, and anger. Davos met them near the Red Keep, relief flooding his face. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "We've contained most of it, but there are still pockets of resistance. They're calling themselves the True Flames, claiming to follow the true Targaryen line, or else they say no Targaryen should rule at all, depending on who you ask. It's a mess." Jon dismounted swiftly, scanning the city. "Where are they now? How did this happen?" Davos explained that the trouble began when rumors spread that the king was gone too long and that the city was being run by Lannisters and Northerners who had no love for King's Landing. Desperate men who had lost homes and families during Daenerys' attack found a rabble-rousing leader who promised them vengeance. Mixed in with them were a few minor lords nursing grudges against the crown, hoping to spark chaos to their advantage. They called themselves the True Flames as a twisted reference to Dragonfire, some wanting to embrace the old Targaryen might, others to rebel against it. They had seized an armory and attacked the Watch. Civilians got caught in the middle, and soon riots flared through the poorer districts. "We've been trying to minimize bloodshed," Davos concluded, rubbing his weary eyes. "We don't want another slaughter." Some of the common folk joined them, thinking they were fighting for justice. Others just want to loot. "We need to end this carefully, or we risk losing everything we've built." Jon's jaw tightened. "I'll go to them," he said. "I'll speak to them directly." Tyrion's eyes widened. "That's madness, Your Grace. They'll kill you on sight if they believe you're a threat or a false Targaryen." "Then I'll risk it," Jon replied, voice steely. "If we answer violence with violence, we'll confirm their worst fears. We'll show them that a Targaryen only knows how to rule through blood. I won't have it." Though uneasy, Davos and Tyrion agreed to help. They organized a small contingent of loyal gold cloaks to accompany Jon as he rode through the streets. Smoke still curled from a few wrecked buildings, and the tension was palpable. Shouting echoed from side alleyways. Corpses lay in the gutter here and there. Men wearing the Watch's colors and those wearing no sigil at all, just anger and desperation on their faces. Jon's group halted at an impromptu barricade where armed rebels stood, eyes blazing with mistrust. One man, tall and scarred, leveled a spear at them. "Turn around or die, Targaryen dogs," he snarled. The men with him brandished swords, clubs, and axes, hardly a disciplined force, but formidable in their desperation. Jon raised a hand, bidding his guards hold. Then he took a step forward on foot, lowering his hood to reveal his face. "I am Jon Targaryen," he declared, voice carrying in the hush that fell. "I was crowned by the lords of this realm to bring peace, not war. I know many of you have lost everything because of my aunt's Dragonfire, because of Daenerys Targaryen. If you hold her crimes against me, I cannot blame you. But know this, I ended her reign myself to prevent further bloodshed. We are all survivors of that horror. We are all trying to live in its aftermath." The men tightened their grips on their weapons, uncertain. One spat on the ground. "Words. Just words." Jon spread his arms wide, showing he held no sword. "I've been rebuilding this city since I took the crown. We've been sending food to those who were hungry, wages to those who would work. If there are those who feel they've been denied, tell me. Let's fix it together. But this, killing your own neighbors in the street, that's not justice." Silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then, from a doorway behind the barricade, a woman emerged, her face drawn with grief, her clothes stained. She held the hand of a trembling child. "Your Grace," she said haltingly, "my husband died the day the dragon burned the city. My oldest boy died in the riots last week. Her voice wavered, tears spilling. We only want to be heard. We lost everything. No one's given us a home. No one's paid for what was done to us." Jon's gaze softened, his heart twisting. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I can't bring back the dead. I can't undo the pain that's been inflicted. But I swear, I am not your enemy. If you need shelter, you'll have it. If you need work, we'll find it. If you need justice, then tell me who has wronged you, and they will face the law." In the hush that followed, the tall rebel lowered his spear slightly, as if uncertain. Others shifted their feet, glancing around. Some, stoked by anger, might have been ready to fight to the death. But the raw grief on the woman's face, the sincerity in John's voice, seemed to affect them. Their ringleader, a wiry man with a haunted expression, stepped forward. "You say that, but look at our streets. Look at our dead. Where was the king when we pleaded for help, when we asked for the burned districts to be rebuilt? It's been nearly a year, and we still live in ruins." John nodded, his tone measured. "I was traveling across the realm, forging alliances to bring more resources here. Perhaps I should have stayed. I take responsibility for that. All I ask is the chance to correct it. The men responsible for looting and abuse in these neighborhoods will face justice if they acted against my orders. But you attacking the Watch, seizing armories? That won't solve anything." A tense negotiation followed, with Davos speaking up for the king's sincerity, Tyrion explaining the crown's precarious finances, and the rebels voicing their grievances. Some were unyielding, their hatred for all Targaryens too deep to quell. Yet others realized the futility of open rebellion. By nightfall, a fragile truce was brokered. The rebels agreed to lay down their arms if Jon promised more direct aid. The Watch would not seek retribution, but those who had committed murders would be tried. A heavy air hung over the city as both sides eyed each other warily, but no further bloodshed erupted that night. In the weeks that followed, Jon redoubled efforts to provide assistance to the most devastated areas. Tyrion secured additional loans to repair housing. A new local council composed of commoners and minor lords was formed to address complaints. Jon himself visited the burned districts daily, ensuring that the promises made were not empty. Slowly, tensions eased, though scars remained. The True Flames disbanded as a formal group, but the memory of their uprising persisted. For Jon, it was a sobering lesson in how even well-intentioned leadership could overlook the desperate and allow resentment to fester. Yet in the aftermath, something else took root, a grudging respect for the king who had not met fire with fire. Word spread through taverns and marketplaces that Jon Targaryen was different. He did not vanish behind the castle walls when trouble loomed. He did not unleash dragonfire or heavy-handed reprisals. He listened, acknowledged his failures, and sought to atone. This narrative, repeated and embellished, began to replace the older fear of a tyrannical Targaryen. As the city's moods calmed, Jon returned to the business of governance. Trade with the free cities expanded, especially now that Essos was showing renewed interest in Westeros after the wars. Yara Greyjoy arrived in King's Landing with a small fleet, proposing an agreement that would grant the Iron Islands more autonomy in exchange for patrolling shipping lanes and stamping out piracy. Jon agreed, aware that the Ironborn would never be fully content under the Crown's rule, but recognizing the importance of strong maritime defense. Yara left satisfied, though she made it clear she would not bow if the Crown overstepped. Meanwhile, a message came from the north, an invitation from Sansa. She requested that the king and his court visit Winterfell to discuss a matter of great importance. Intrigued and a bit homesick, Jon left King's Landing in capable hands, Davos, Tyrion, and Brienne ensuring stability, and journeyed north. The roads grew colder and darker as they passed the Neck and traversed the snowy expanses of the north. Winterfell stood proudly, its walls repaired from the siege damage inflicted by the army of the dead. Smoke rose from the great chimney, and the battered courtyard now thrived with blacksmiths, stable hands, and soldiers training under the watchful eye of the castle's master-at-arms. Sansa received Jon in the hall with a warm embrace, though her gaze carried a hint of distant caution. She wore the mantle of a ruler comfortably now, her hair braided with a simple elegance, and the direwolf of House Stark pinned at her shoulder. After the initial pleasantries, she led him to the solar, where they spoke in private. There, she explained her concerns. The northern lords were grateful for Jon's leadership, but they also wished to affirm certain rights and customs that set the north apart. Some even wanted full independence. Sansa had managed to dissuade them for now, pointing out that the realm needed unity to recover. But she wanted Jon's word that the north would never again be forced to bend its knee to a tyrant or see its resources exploited. Jon understood all too well. He promised that he would grant the North more autonomy in its governance. In essence, they would be subject to the crown's laws, but free to handle internal matters without interference. Sansa seemed relieved, though she confessed that she sometimes feared for Jon's safety in King's Landing. Their conversation turned to old memories, of Ned, of Robb, of the tragedies they had endured. Sansa did not speak ill of Daenerys, but Jon sensed her lingering resentment for what had happened to the North under Targaryen rule, both past and recent. Still, she recognized that Jon was doing his best. The next morning, a messenger from Castle Black arrived, breathless with news that White Harbor ships had spotted a lone dragon flying north along the coast. It was said to be enormous, black as coal, with glowing embers in its eyes. Some believed it was Drogon, the last dragon that had carried Daenerys' body away. Rumor claimed it soared over the frozen seas, heading into the lands beyond the wall. The men of the Night's Watch were on edge, uncertain if the dragon posed a threat or if it was simply a beast mourning its lost queen. Jon felt an ache at the mention of Drogon. He remembered the majesty of the creature, the power and fury bound to Daenerys' will. If Drogon was indeed in the far north, what did that mean for Westeros? Would it return to set the land ablaze once more, or would it vanish into legend? He decided to ride to Castle Black with Tormund's earlier warnings echoing in his mind. Winter was receding slowly, but the chill near the wall was still biting. The vast barrier of ice stood as it always had, though missing a section destroyed in the war. Patrols ranged out beyond the broken gate, keeping a watchful eye on the wilderness. Jon met with the Lord Commander, an untested young ranger who had taken the position after the war, and asked about sightings of the dragon. Some rangers claimed to have seen a massive silhouette against the moonlight. Others dismissed it as a trick of the eyes. Still, unsettling tales of monstrous shadows roamed among the free folk, who reported that Drogon's roars had been heard in the night. Jon made a decision. He would lead a small party beyond the wall to see if these rumors were true, to determine if Drogon posed a threat or if there was some other ill omen stirring in the frozen north. At first, his advisors balked. He was the king, after all. But Jon's old instincts as a ranger of the Night's Watch returned, and he insisted. Leading him were Tormund Giantsbane, a handful of seasoned free folk hunters, and a few loyal knights who refused to let their king venture into danger alone. They set off from the wall at dawn, the vast expanse of snow and ice opening before them. The wind howled, carrying distant echoes of memory. Days passed in grueling travel. The land was eerily silent, as if still recovering from the horrors of the long night. Here and there, they found the remnants of old camps, skeletons of the dead that had been scattered. The new threat Tormund had mentioned was not immediately visible, though they spotted tracks suggesting large predators roamed these wastes. Eventually, one frigid night, they made camp near a cluster of frozen lakes. The aurora shimmered overhead, painting the sky in ghostly greens and blues. As they huddled around a fire, Tormund nudged Jon and gestured to the horizon. There, a faint silhouette glided across the sky, vast wings beating in slow, thunderous strokes. A low, rumbling growl reverberated over the tundra. Drogon. The black dragon soared across the moon's path, then vanished into the darkness. Tormund breathed out a frosty breath. Told you something was stirring. Jon stood, the heat of the fire momentarily forgotten. Emotions he couldn't name surged in him, guilt, sorrow, awe. That was the dragon who had once allowed him to ride upon its back, the dragon who had shared Daenerys' bond. Now it was alone in this frozen land, a creature of fire amid the snows. He wondered if it blamed him for Daenerys' death, if it carried a hatred that might one day manifest in flame. They followed Drogon's tracks as best they could the next morning. The trail led into deep canyons of ice where the sun scarcely reached. Snow fell heavily, reducing visibility. Once or twice, they glimpsed the dragon's shape through the swirling gusts, but it always retreated deeper, as though luring them in. Eventually, they came upon a wide chasm where steam rose from beneath the ice, possibly from underground hot springs or fissures. The warmth had melted parts of the glacier, creating a hidden hollow. Cautiously, the party descended. What they found made them gasp, a cavern of shimmering ice walls reflecting flickers of firelight from deep within. Drogon lay curled around something. At first, Jon thought it might be a fresh kill, a mammoth or some other creature. But as they inched closer, they saw shapes in the ice, large, round forms. Eggs. Dragon eggs, half encased in the frost. Drogon's presence had heated this hidden chamber, forming a bizarre microclimate. The beast watched them with narrowed eyes, a low rumble emanating from its throat. Jon raised a hand to hold his companions back. He locked eyes with the dragon. There was a silent tension in the air, as though time itself paused. He stepped forward a single pace, his breath hitching. Memories flooded him, flying on Regal's back, feeling the wind in his face, seeing Daenerys' smile when he first touched her dragons. Then came the memory of that last moment, the dagger in her heart, Drogon's roar of anguish. The dragon had spared him then, melting the Iron Throne instead. Why? Perhaps even Drogon couldn't bring itself to kill the last Targaryen. Now in this icy lair, the creature seemed torn between wrath and a lingering remnant of the bond it once shared with Daenerys. Jon knelt slowly, lowering his gaze, presenting himself as no threat. Drogon snorted, the hot gust of its breath ruffling Jon's hair. For a long minute neither moved. Jon could almost sense the dragon's grief, raw and feral. Then, with a huff that shook the cavern, Drogon spread its wings and rose, scattering shards of ice. The ground trembled. In a rush of wind and fury it leapt into the air, surging through an opening at the top of the cavern, leaving behind the eggs and a swirl of freezing mist. Jon stood, exhaling shakily. His companions looked as though they expected the dragon to return at any moment, unleashing flame. But the cavern was still, save for the distant echoes of the beast's roar receding across the tundra. Tormund scratched his beard. Did you see that? Eggs? Jon nodded, words failing him momentarily. If those eggs hatched and the dragons survived, it would mean the return of Dragakind to Westeros. But here, in the far north, where they might never be found or might eventually emerge as fearsome creatures beholden to no one. We can't leave them here, said one of the knights. What if they hatch? There'll be dragons roaming free, burning everything. Tormund snorted. What do you suggest? Taking them to King's Landing? Raising them like chickens? Jon hesitated. We can't risk them falling into the wrong hands. But we also can't allow them to die. Dragons are part of this world's balance, for better or worse. He swallowed. We'll inform the Night's Watch. They'll guard this place, keep watch over the eggs. Perhaps Drogon will continue to protect them. Either way, we need to ensure the realm is prepared. If dragons return, we must not let history repeat itself. In the days after that discovery, Jon's party completed its survey of the north and returned to the wall. Jon sent ravens to his council explaining the situation in careful, measured words. He refrained from mentioning the exact location of the eggs, not wanting to spark a scramble for dragon power among the ambitious. Only a few trusted individuals would know, and the men of the Watch, sworn to duty, would keep silent. For now, Drogon seemed content in its solitary vigil, but none could say what the future might hold. Jon lingered in Winterfell for a fortnight, discussing northern matters with Sansa and making sure the region's autonomy was secure. He sat in the great hall by the roaring hearth, recalling childhood memories of simpler times, even if he had felt like an outsider then. Now he was a king, recognized throughout the realm, yet in his heart, he was still that boy who never belonged. It was a bittersweet realization. Sansa sensed his melancholy, but she was proud of him in her quiet, poised way. The night before Jon departed for King's Landing, they shared a final dinner. She told him she believed he was forging a different path for the realm. He told her he was only trying to live up to the name Stark. The return journey south felt oddly comforting. The land's gradual shift from frozen forests to temperate plains reminded Jon of the unity he was trying to forge across this vast continent. When at last he saw the familiar sprawl of King's Landing, he felt a curious mixture of relief and dread. He was home, though the city had never truly been his home. It was, however, his responsibility now. During his absence, Tyrion had kept the peace, navigating the realm's politics with his usual finesse, though he complained in jest about the sleepless nights. Davos had secured more trade pacts, and Bronn had returned briefly to finalize certain financial arrangements. The city's rebirth continued, with new constructions rising where ruins had been. The newly formed city council, composed of commoners, tradesmen, and lesser nobles, met regularly to advise the crown on local issues. Jon took heart in these small signs of progress, seeing a city that was learning to govern itself with more fairness and transparency. In the following months, Jon focused on strengthening these reforms. He issued decrees requiring local councils in major cities, giving commoners a voice in governance. Education and literacy programs were proposed, though progress was slow. He sought to limit the worst abuses of feudalism, ensuring that lords who mistreated their subjects faced royal sanction. At court, he encouraged open debate, allowing disagreements to surface rather than be whispered behind closed doors. Some found this unorthodox, even dangerous, but it gradually fostered a culture of accountability. Amid these developments, envoys from across the sea arrived, hearing tales of the Targaryen Stark King who refused to conquer but aimed to heal. Some offered alliances, others came to test his resolve. Yet the overwhelming sense among them was that Westeros was no longer the fractured, easily manipulated land it once was. It had grown weary of war, and it followed a king who had seen too much death to hunger for more. From Dorne, a new treaty was signed, affirming closer ties and mutual recognition. Dorne would remain largely independent in style and culture, but it acknowledged Jon's sovereignty as part of the Seven Kingdoms. In exchange, Dorne's rulers secured trade privileges and a pledge from the crown to respect their traditions. From the Iron Islands, Yara kept her promise, patrolling the seas and curbing piracy. From the north, Sansa held the region's loyalty while enjoying autonomy. The Riverlands rebuilt under Edmure's guidance, the Stormlands prospered under Gendry's, and the Vale stood guard with its mountainous defenses. The Reach provided bounty to feed the realm, albeit under Bronn's watchful, gold-counting eye. The Westerlands had not fully reconciled with the new order, but they were too weak to challenge it outright, preferring to keep their heads down and rebuild wealth under the oversight of the new Lord Paramount, a distant cousin of the Lannisters who swore fealty. Years passed, slowly wearing away the immediate memories of Dragonfire in King's Landing. Children born after the war grew up hearing stories of the Night King's defeat and the crowning of a reluctant Targaryen. Some recounted tales of the last living dragon, Drogon, haunting the north with its brood, myths that might or might not be true. Yet for once in living memory, the Seven Kingdoms knew a long peace, sustained by the careful balance Jon had forged. He attended weddings, negotiations, and village fairs, always mindful that his presence signaled more than just royal pageantry. He was there to remind lords and commoners alike that the realm had chosen a different path. No man's rule is without fault, and Jon's reign was no exception. Factions schemed in the shadows, resentments flared, and disputes arose between houses. But each time conflict threatened to erupt into war, the memory of the horrors they had all survived kept the lords at the negotiation table. Jon's unwavering stance on justice, tempered by compassion, became a cornerstone of the new era. Some called it the Snow Era, ironically referencing the king who once had no name. Others referred to it as the Stark Restoration, though that neglected his Targaryen lineage. Jon himself cared little for the labels. He only cared that fewer graves had to be dug. In time, whispers began that the king should remarry, produce heirs to solidify the throne's stability. Diplomats from Essos brought offers of noble daughters and alliances. Some Westerosi houses put forth eligible ladies, hoping to tie themselves to the royal line. Jon, still bearing the weight of past heartbreak, hesitated. Daenerys's memory lingered, as did Ygritte's. Love had always been a battlefield for him, filled with impossible choices and tragedy. Yet eventually he understood the importance of an heir for the realm's future. After careful thought, he chose a bride not for power or wealth, but for compatibility in ideals, someone who believed in healing the realm, who had shown herself capable of compassion even in adversity. The realm greeted the union with cautious optimism, seeing it as another step toward stability. As the smallfolk prospered in relative peace and the lords grudgingly accepted the new order, Jon continued to wear the crown as lightly as possible. He favored practical clothing, often riding out to speak with villagers or soldiers, inspecting roads and granaries. Once, a traveling bard composed a ballad calling him the Wolf Dragon King, singing of how he had the blood of conquerors but the heart of a steward. Though Jon found it embarrassing, the tune spread throughout taverns across Westeros. Late one evening, seated in the solar of the Red Keep, Jon reflected on the path his life had taken. Tyrion had retired for the night, Davos was off inspecting ships in the harbor, and the castle was quiet. Moonlight fell across the ancient stone, illuminating tapestries that depicted stories of conquest and rebellion. Jon's gaze drifted to the crown resting on the table, a circlet of hammered steel, fashioned from weapons of the fallen. It symbolized the violence that had forged a realm, but also the possibility of something better. He remembered his father, both of them Ned Stark who raised him, and Rhaegar Targaryen whose blood he carried. Each man had faced his own tragic destiny. Jon had seen the darkest nights and the brightest hopes. He had knelt in the cold, ready to die for duty. He had soared on dragon's wings, tasted both love and betrayal, and lost people who mattered more than any throne. In the end, fate had placed him here, as king of the Seven Kingdoms, a role he never sought but accepted. Tomorrow, he would rise at dawn to hear petitions from farmers and merchants. He would draft letters to lords who needed gentle nudges or firm reminders of their vows. He would meet with the small council to discuss the next steps for ensuring peace. The duties would never end. And that, he realized, was a comfort in its own way. So long as he had duties, he could honor the memory of those he loved by serving a kingdom that deserved better than another cycle of brutality. In that tireless service, he found a measure of peace. The realm had bled enough. Now, under a king who valued duty above power, it stood a chance to heal. He picked up the crown, feeling its cold weight in his hands, and then set it aside. Standing by the window, he gazed out over the city. Torches and lanterns glimmered like scattered stars, illuminating rooftops and alleyways. Life went on. Families ate their supper, children played in the courtyards, and old men dozed by hearthfires. All of them lived under the watch of a reluctant king who had sworn to protect them. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, king of the Seven Kingdoms, bowed his head in silent prayer to the old gods and the new. If they were listening, he hoped they would grant him the strength to continue bearing this burden. Far beyond the horizon, somewhere in the barren north, a dragon might be guarding its eggs. Perhaps, in time, those creatures would roam the skies again. Perhaps the world would never be fully free of danger. But for now, he was content to stand as a shield between his people and the next storm on the horizon. Winter would come again one day, but the realm would face it together, under a king who remembered what it was like to fight against the dark. And that, he believed with all his heart, was enough to carry them forward into a new age of hope. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen in name, yet still Snow in heart, rose from his quiet vigil in the solar of the Red Keep. The moonlit city sprawled below him. The crown rested on the table behind him, a reminder of a burden that never left his shoulders. Wind drifted through tea. He opened windows carrying the night's stillness and the faint hum of a city not yet fully at rest. After those first tumultuous years of rule, years spent mending wounds, forging alliances, and quelling riots, he had brought a measure of stability to King's Landing and the realm at large. Yet peace felt tenuous, a thin crust over waters that still ran dangerously deep. He sensed it in the hush of the halls and the guarded whispers of the courtiers. He sensed it even in himself, in the way he woke with his heart hammering at the memory of old battles. Peace was precious, but it demanded constant vigilance. When the first streaks of dawn pried at the horizon, Jon rose to start another day. He dressed in dark breeches and a plain doublet, the only mark of royalty a small emblem stitching dire wolf and dragon together at the collar. His habit of rejecting lavish finery had drawn both admiration and confusion from the lords who expected a king to flaunt gold and silk. But he did not want them to revere him for wealth. What he wanted was for them to do right by their people and think of service rather than power. Perhaps it was a foolish hope, but in a land that had known so many tyrants, it was all he could offer. The crown of hammered steel, a circlet of battered swords and melted scraps, lay on its stand. He sighed, picked it up, and settled it on his head. Though it felt cold, he no longer flinched at the weight. Duty, he reminded himself as he left his chambers and descended into the waking Red Keep. In the throne room, sunlight struck the cracked marble floors, illuminating the swirling dust motes. The repairs here had been slow, never quite erasing the scars of dragon fire and war. Where grand pillars once stood, new supports and scaffolding loomed, a reminder that restoration was as endless as the histories of this realm. Jon had spoken with the stonemasons, urging them to strengthen the foundations and leave some of the blackened stone as a testament to what had come before. Let no one forget, he'd said. Let these scorches remain as a lesson. The iron throne rose at the far end, those twisted swords fused into a seat that had cost the realm too much blood. It felt alien to him still, but he forced himself to walk the length of the hall, ignoring the pinch in his gut, and seat himself upon it. When the great doors opened, petitioners and dignitaries came forward in cautious lines, many bowing deeply. One by one, they spoke of disputes, pleas, and proposals. Jon listened, leaning forward so they would know they had his attention. This was not glamour or ceremony, it was the slow grind of governance. A place where small matters, land boundaries, trade quarrels, old feuds needed the king's judgment. The first petitioner was a minor lord from the Riverlands, protesting a new toll that a local official had levied upon his barges. The next spoke of laborers in the crownlands who complained that their pay had been cut when a vineyard changed hands. Then came a representative from the new city council formed in the aftermath of the True Flames riot with a request for more funds to fortify a freshwater supply system. Jon asked questions, listened to counter-arguments, weighed what he knew of the realm's finances from Tyrion's exhaustive tallies. At times, Davos, now master of ships but effectively his most trusted counselor, spoke up to offer guidance. So the morning wore on until the sun climbed high and sweat beaded under the collar of Jon's tunic. At last, as midday shadows shortened, the final petitioner bowed, satisfied or at least resigned to the king's verdict. Jon dismissed the gathered crowd, nodding to Tyrion, who stood to the side with a patient expression. "Hardly a day's work done," Tyrion said, approaching the throne. "You'll need a proper meal before the small council meets, or you'll faint during the budget discussions." Jon managed a wry half-smile. "A meal would be welcome. Then I want to hear what's happening in the ports. I received word that Yara Greyjoy is patrolling near the stepstones again. We need to make sure we're aligned." They left the throne room together. Tyrion led him to the lesser dining hall where a simple spread of bread, roasted vegetables, and cold meat had been laid out. Cooks and attendants bowed, making themselves scarce so the king could speak privately with his hand. Tyrion poured himself watered wine, swirling it thoughtfully while Jon took water. They ate in a comfortable if subdued silence, the clicking of utensils echoing in the chamber. Despite the relative peace of the realm, an undercurrent of tension had settled upon them. Perhaps it was the knowledge that even small problems could ripple outward. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, a sensation that the old cracks in the foundation might still gape open. When they were nearly finished, Davos entered, a scroll in his hand. He bowed quickly, more out of formality than devotion. Jon had long told him it was hardly necessary. "Your Grace," Davos said. "I've been up since dawn sorting out an incident in the harbor. Some Braavosi merchants are complaining their shipments were seized by a local official claiming they owed back taxes. Tempers were high enough that one of the merchants drew a blade. We managed to calm the situation, but I fear we'll need a clearer policy on foreign trade." Tyrion groaned softly. "The Master of Coin has tried to set certain guidelines, but the realm's finances are complicated. We have loans from the Iron Bank to repay, so taxes have been raised in certain categories. Officials might be enforcing them a bit overzealously to please the crown." Jon wiped his hands on a cloth and frowned. "We need fair enforcement, not overreach. Call the local official in for questioning, find out if corruption is at play or just confusion. Meanwhile, instruct the gold cloaks to keep an eye on the Braavosi merchants. The last thing we need is a major conflict with the Iron Bank's homeland. If we lose their support, or worse, provoke their anger, it could destabilize everything." Davos nodded. I'll handle it." And in other news, a raven arrived from the north. Sansa writes that another wave of storms has damaged some outlying settlements. She's requesting relief in the form of grain and coin to rebuild. It's the third such request in 2 months. The weather up there is ruthless, but the north remains vital to the realm. Jon felt a rush of concern and a pang of guilt. "Do we have the stores to spare?" Tyrion tapped his fingers on the table. "We can manage some shipments, but we must be careful. The harvest in the Crownlands is uncertain this year due to drought in some regions. Perhaps we can negotiate with Bronn for additional supplies from the Reach. He has more harvest than he knows what to do with." Davos cleared his throat, hesitant. "My lord, you know Bronn. He doesn't do anything without securing a tidy profit." Jon let out a long breath. "Then we'll ensure it's worth his while. Talk to him, Tyrion. See if we can broker a decent price. We'll send Sansa what she needs. I won't have the North suffer if we can help it." With that decided, they moved on to the next order of business, the meeting of the small council. Jon led the way to a refurbished chamber near the tower, one that had been gutted by dragonfire years before but now served as a symbol of rebirth. A wide table of polished oak dominated the room, ringed by chairs for the king's advisors. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating the worn tapestry of a dire wolf and a dragon that hung behind Jon's seat. Present were Tyrion, Davos, Ser Brienne of Tarth, who had assumed a role akin to Lord Commander of the King's Guard, even if she disdained such formalities, Lord Yohn Royce from the Vale as Master of Laws, and 3 other counselors who had proven their worth in matters of trade, local governance, and finance. One empty chair remained for the Master of Whisperers, a position that had not been filled since Varys' death. Jon had yet to find someone he trusted enough to place in that seat, and part of him believed that fewer whispers might make for a more honest rule. The council session began with discussions of treasury balances. Bronn, absent this day, had sent a letter detailing the crown's debts and revenues. Even with the realm at peace, the cost of rebuilding was vast. Only the robust trade that had blossomed under Jon's administration and the alliances Tyrion had brokered kept the coffers from running dry. When talk turned to troop deployments, Brienne explained that the city watch was stable in number, though it could benefit from better equipment and training. Lord Royce suggested further investing in roads that linked the Crownlands to the Reach and Stormlands, which would ease trade and military movement. Davos then brought up the ongoing problem of outlaws lingering in the forests outside King's Landing, many of them remnants of the wars who had never surrendered. Jon's brow furrowed. He hated the idea of punishing desperate men who had lost everything, but banditry could not be left unchecked. Offer them a chance to surrender, he said quietly. Give them an opportunity to join the rebuilding efforts or the Night's Watch if they have no place else. But if they refuse, we'll protect the innocent. I can't allow them to terrorize the roads. As the meeting wound down, Tyrion cleared his throat. There's also a matter you may find delicate. A delegation from Pentos arrived this morning, carrying a marriage proposal for you, your grace. They claim a distant lineage that ties them loosely to old Essosi families once loyal to House Targaryen. They're eager to forge a bond through matrimony. They brought gifts as well. Enough gold to impress even Bronn. Jon felt his stomach twist. Marriage proposals were not new. They had come from all corners, from Dorne to Braavos to even Karth. He had resisted them all, focusing on the realm, still mourning the ghosts of his past. But the realm's lords whispered about the need for an heir. Some wanted him to secure the Targaryen line. Others muttered that if he died without issue, the realm would be thrown back into chaos. What do you recommend? He asked, addressing Tyrion but glancing around the table. The council exchanged looks. Brienne remained stoic, though Jon sensed she believed that marriage for a king was a duty, not a luxury. Lord Royce coughed. Your Grace, it's customary for a king to produce heirs to ensure stability. While it's your decision, the realm grows uneasy when succession is uncertain. Jon's fingers drummed on the table. Memories flickered in his mind, the cold wind of the north, Ygritte's fiery hair, Daenerys's tearful face. Let me consider it, he finally said. I won't dismiss it out of hand, but I'm not ready to accept either. I need to see what these Pentoshi envoys truly want. Tyrion nodded, clearly relieved Jon was at least considering the matter. Then, the king adjourned the council, leaving each member to handle their assigned tasks. He lingered in the corridor with Brienne, who walked beside him in her gleaming armor. They passed a pair of gold cloaks standing watch, and Brienne offered them a curt nod. How do you feel about all this talk of marriage, Sir Brienne? Jon asked in a low voice, partly wanting a fresh perspective. She was silent for a moment. I pledged my life to protect Lady Sansa and your family. My concern is the security of the realm. If marriage ensures stability, then perhaps it is wise. But I also believe you should only wed if you can respect your partner. Forced unions often bring more discord than peace. Jon appreciated her forthrightness. Thank you. I suppose I must tread carefully. The last thing I want is another war sparked by claims to the throne. If a marriage can protect Westeros from ambition and strife, it might be worth it if I can find someone who understands what we're trying to do. Brienne placed a gauntlet hand on his shoulder, an unusual show of warmth for the dutiful knight. You bear too many burdens already. Marriage may lighten them, or it may add more. Just know that we, those who follow you, wish for your happiness as well as the kingdom's. That evening, Jon had little chance to dwell further on the marriage question, for urgent news arrived. A raven from Castle Black reported renewed sightings of Drogon flying beyond the wall. Wildlings had glimpsed the great black dragon patrolling the skies, sometimes vanishing into frozen valleys. More unsettling were rumors that a handful of monstrous creatures stalked the deeper north. Some called them ice-spine beasts, others claimed they were giant wolves mutated by strange magic. The Lord Commander requested guidance. Jon retreated to his chambers, the letter in hand. It troubled him. He recalled his recent journey beyond the wall, where he'd seen Drogon guarding a hidden clutch of eggs in a cavern warmed by underground heat. He remembered the hush of that moment, how the dragon had spared him but was still coiled in grief and feral protectiveness. What if some of those eggs had hatched? What if the land beyond the wall now harbored young dragons struggling to survive in a frozen wasteland? Was the realm prepared for that? He inhaled deeply, willing himself to remain calm. So long as Drogon stayed beyond the wall, there was no immediate threat to the populated regions. Still, the realm should not be caught unawares. While he did not desire to refortify the entire Night's Watch with thousands of soldiers, perhaps a measured approach was needed. He would send more rangers, men he trusted, to keep an eye on the situation. For better or worse, these creatures were part of the world. Jon had no desire to see them destroyed. They were the last living link to Daenerys's dream of breaking the wheel. But if they began attacking the free folk or threatening the realm's fragile peace, he would have to act. He wrote a swift reply, instructing the Lord Commander to maintain vigilance and avoid provoking the dragon. He authorized more resources to be sent north, a dozen skilled rangers, additional supplies. He also requested that Tormund Giantsbane keep him informed, as Tormund had a knack for understanding the free folk and the wilderness. Once the ink dried, Jon sealed the parchment and summoned a messenger to send the raven back to the wall at first light. Then he set about drafting letters to Sansa and other northern lords, warning them of the situation with Drogon without causing panic. The candle burned low in the holder by the time he finished. Weariness tugged at him, but his mind remained restless. Over the following weeks, the business of the realm rolled on. The official from the harbor was disciplined for overstepping his authority, and Braavosi merchants were appeased with fairer terms. Dorne sent a delegation that spoke pleasantly, reaffirming their loyalty while also securing beneficial trade routes. Bronn, ever the opportunist, struck a bargain that allowed him to sell grain to the crown at a profit, though not an extortionate one. In exchange, he received certain shipping rights that raised eyebrows but filled the royal coffers enough to justify them. Sansa's gratitude arrived by Raven, praising Jon's aid and announcing progress in rebuilding damaged villages. The troubles in King's Landing simmered but did not boil over. Most outlaws had accepted Jon's offer of mercy or faced justice when they refused. Through it all, Jon found no respite in personal matters. The Pentoshi envoys lingered, eager to press their marriage proposal. Each day, they arrived with new gifts: exotic wines, embroidered silks, jeweled daggers. Tyrion teased that if Jon refused them much longer, the envoys might run out of trinkets and resort to offering their own family members as servants. Jon, discomfort, accepted the presents only to distribute them among the city's orphanages and struggling artisans. He disliked the notion of bribes disguised as gifts. Yet the political reality remained. Forging a marriage alliance with Pentos could open valuable trade routes, ease the realm's debt to the Iron Bank, and strengthen Westeros's position abroad. He needed counsel from those he trusted most. Late one afternoon, he invited Davos, Tyrion, and Brienne to speak with him in a smaller council chamber off the main hall. Once they were seated, Jon eyed the door to ensure privacy and then began. "I've delayed my answer to the Pentoshi envoys, but the pressure is growing. The realm expects me to marry, to secure a line of succession. And Pentos is not the only candidate. Envoys from Lys and Volantis have also written. House Tyrell is gone, but new families in the Reach might push for a match. Even some northern lords think I should marry a northern lady to bind our region closer to the crown. I'm uncertain." Tyrion, arms folded, regarded him. From a purely political standpoint, an associate alliance might be beneficial, but it comes with risks. Tying ourselves too closely to Pentos could drag us into their conflicts. Their politics are labyrinthine, but ignoring them altogether might shut us out of vital trade. Meanwhile, if you choose a noble from the Westerosi houses, it might bolster internal unity, but also risk jealousy from other great houses. It's a delicate balance. Davos rubbed his beard. "I've never claimed to be a grand strategist in matters of marriage, Your Grace. I do know the realm's had its fill of alliances that end in betrayal. So find someone who shares your values. The crown can't withstand another war triggered by an unhappy union." Brienne, quiet until now, added gently, "If you decide to marry, do it on your own terms, but do not ignore the realm's need. That is the way of kingship. Always a choice between your personal desire and your responsibility to thousands." Jon nodded, heavy with the truth of their words. In the end, no one could decide for him. He would continue to weigh his options, observe the envoys, see if any genuine trust could be forged. Behind his reluctance, a deeper ache reminded him that all the women he had loved in the past had come to tragic ends. The notion of embracing another bond, only to see it shattered by duty or fate, was painful. Yet the realm deserved stability, and perhaps, in forging a new connection, he might finally lay his old ghosts to rest. In the midst of these considerations, winter's slow retreat allowed for a flurry of activity across Westeros. Jon embarked on another progress through parts of the realm, though shorter than before, this time focusing on the Stormlands and Dorne to ensure the roads were secure and the trade routes unimpeded. He found Gendry Baratheon at Storm's End, surrounded by newly built shipyards. Gendry proudly showed the king a small fleet of swift war galleys. The shipwrights there had used improved designs borrowed from Essos and the Ironborn. Jon commended him, seeing in Gendry a young but dedicated lord who wanted only to prove his worth. When Jon reached Dorne, he was greeted with polite warmth. The ruling family, descendants of Ilaria Sand's distant kin and other Dornish nobility, did not forget past enmities but recognized Jon's even-handed rule. They treated him to lavish feasts of spiced wines, roasted peppers, and serpent stew, discussing the possibility of opening new routes across the narrow sea. He noted that Dorne had always been fiercely proud of its independence. The treaty he had signed with them gave them near autonomy. They liked that arrangement, and so did he. Better that each region handle its own customs, so long as loyalty to the crown held them together in times of need. Returning to King's Landing from this tour, Jon discovered a new swirl of gossip and rumor. Apparently, a small band of Targaryen loyalists, worshippers of the memory of Daenerys or Aerys, depending on which stories they cherished, were claiming that a true Targaryen heir had been found across the sea, a child rumored to be the offspring of Rhaego, the son Daenerys supposedly lost. The notion was preposterous, as Daenerys's only pregnancy had ended in tragedy long before Jon even knew her. But rumor-mongers thrived on such tales. The name of this supposed child was unknown, details vague. Yet the gossip circulated, especially among those who harbored doubt about Jon's rightful claim. Tyrion dismissed it as nonsense when Jon asked, but Jon knew well how illusions could spark wildfire in uncertain times. If enough disaffected lords believed that another Targaryen, untainted by King's Landing's past, was alive, they might rally behind that phantom heir. He asked Davos to investigate quietly. Davos, resourceful as ever, dispatched loyal men to gather information. Most of what came back was rumor layered upon rumor. Nobody seemed to have a credible source, but the talk did not die down. Jon found himself increasingly vexed by these fantasies. He had never wanted the throne, yet now he felt compelled to guard his legitimacy against false pretenders. He was in the midst of these tangled dilemmas when another raven arrived from the Night's Watch. This one brought a single, startling message. Drogon had been sighted near the Frostfangs in a violent confrontation with some unknown beasts, and the Watchers believed the dragon might be injured. The letter said that Tormund and a handful of free folk had gone to investigate, but they had not returned. Unease gnawed at Jon, kindling an urge to go north once again. He knew well that if Drogon was truly hurt, the chaos that might follow could be dangerous. A wounded dragon could lash out or die, leaving behind unguarded eggs or young dragons. If it perished at the hands of monstrous creatures in the far north, what terror might those beasts become? Jon summoned Tyrion, Davos, and Brienne to his private solar. After reading them the raven's contents, he spoke plainly, "I must go north." All three reacted with predictable alarm. Brienne's eyes widened. Tyrion pinched the bridge of his nose. Davos muttered, I thought as much. I know it's risky," Jon said, pacing by the window where the city lights flickered below. "But if Drogon dies, we need to ensure no one takes advantage of the situation. If he's alive, we need to see that he doesn't turn on the free folk. I can't sit here in the Red Keep while it unfolds beyond the wall." Tyrion cleared his throat. "Your Grace, you are king. Your place is with the realm." Brienne stepped forward, her voice firm. "Let me go in your stead. I'll take a select group of knights, coordinate with the Night's Watch, and handle the situation. Your presence is too valuable here." Jon turned to her, gratitude warring with determination in his eyes. "I trust you more than anyone, Sir Brienne, but this is my responsibility. I share the blood of dragons. I might have a chance at reason if Drogon can even remember me in the state he's in. We can't risk turning this into a hunt that ends in slaughter." They argued long into the night, with Tyrion pointing out that the realm's political situation was too delicate for Jon to vanish for weeks, Davos cautioning him about possible conspiracies in his absence, and Brienne insisting on at least accompanying him with a guard. Jon, however, remained adamant. In the end, a compromise was reached. He would lead a small expedition north, but Brienne would remain in King's Landing to maintain order with Tyrion. Davos, whose experience in tough situations had proven invaluable, would accompany Jon, along with a carefully chosen retinue, a dozen skilled men, half from the gold cloaks, half from the knightly ranks, plus a few hardy volunteers from the north who knew the terrain. The city's governance would pass to a regency council, with Tyrion as acting head should Jon be delayed. They left within a week, traveling swiftly by horse and carriage. News of the king's departure spread, sparking speculation. Some believed he was going to negotiate with the Iron Bank. Others thought he was seeking a bride in secret. A few guessed the truth, that he was drawn by rumors of the last dragon. John didn't bother to confirm or deny. He simply donned his traveling cloak, strapped Longclaw to his hip, and rode out at dawn, the small party trailing behind him. The air was crisp and the sky streaked with orange as they passed through the city gates. He caught sight of common folk pausing their morning chores to watch him go. The weight of the crown felt heavier than it had in a long while. The journey north took several weeks. They crossed the neck where the wetlands still teemed with insects despite the cooler weather. They made brief stops in White Harbor where Lord Manderley greeted John with lavish feasts he tried politely to refuse. Then they pressed on into the deepening chill. When Winterfell rose before them, gray towers sturdy against the sky, John felt a pang of homesickness. He had spent little time here since ascending the throne, trusting Sansa's capable leadership. Her welcome was warm but tinged with worry when she learned the purpose of his expedition. She insisted on providing him with additional soldiers hardy northern riders used to the cold. John agreed to let them reinforce the watch on the King's Road but did not plan to bring them all beyond the wall. He wanted a small party able to move swiftly. Sansa took him aside in the Godwood. The ancient weirwood stood silent, its red leaves fluttering in the breeze. He saw a hint of sorrow in her eyes, perhaps recalling how their family had been whittled down by tragedy. "I wish you didn't feel the need to risk yourself again," she said softly. "But I know you too well. You'll go because it's right. Promise me you'll return." John placed a hand over hers. "I promise to try with all my strength. The realm is more important than I am, but I'll do what I must to keep it safe." She embraced him, pressing her cheek against his cloak, and for a moment the world felt as it once did when they were children playing in the snow under Eddard Stark's watchful eye. Then she stepped back, remembering they were no longer children and he was no longer just her brother. The next morning he departed Winterfell with Davos and their modest band, forging ahead to the wall under an overcast sky. Castle Black looked much as he remembered, though the breach in the wall from the Night King's assault had been sealed through a massive engineering effort aided by the Free Folk. Fewer men patrolled the ramparts now. The Night's Watch was a shadow of its former self, reduced in number. Still, the Lord Commander, young, grim-faced, but earnest, stood ready to receive them. After exchanging greetings and hearing the latest reports, John understood the situation was more serious than the Raven had suggested. Wildling scouts swore they saw Drogon limping through the skies. Strange carcasses of unknown beasts were found, half-burned. Something was happening in the Frost Fangs, an epicenter of feral violence. Tormund Giantsbane had gone with a handful of free folk to investigate, but none had returned. John felt a stab of worry for his friend. Tormund was hardy, fearless to a fault, but even he could fall prey to monstrous foes or a wounded dragon's wrath. With the Lord Commander's help, John assembled what he needed for a trek beyond the wall: fur-lined tents, climbing gear, provisions, dragonglass weapons, a vestige from the war against the undead, though they expected no whites this time. Then, taking only those who volunteered, he set out the next dawn, the gate in the wall creaking open to let them pass into the white expanse beyond. The party consisted of about 20 souls: John, Davos, a handful of veterans from King's Landing, 2 seasoned rangers of the Night's Watch, and a few free folk who had lingered near the wall. The wind was cold enough to gnaw at bones, and a pale sun did little to warm them. They traveled on foot, their breaths steaming in the air. Snow crunched underfoot. Memories flooded John's mind, the first time he had ridden out as a black brother, Ygritte's laughter echoing across frozen fields, the war with the dead. This land was harsh, cruel, and it tolerated only the strong or the clever. Days blurred together in a monotonous trudge. Each night, they made camp in sheltered hollows or behind outcroppings of rock, taking shifts to watch for danger. Often, John found himself awake, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, dragon's wings or monstrous shapes. He thought of Daenerys, her fierce eyes when she spoke of freeing the world, the sorrow in her gaze at the end. Once he dreamed of her walking across the snow, reaching out to him in silence, but when he moved toward her, she dissolved into ash. On the 4th day, they found tracks. Not of Drogon, those would be impossible to miss, but of some large creature with wide paws and elongated claws. The footprints were spaced irregularly, as if the beast had been dragging something behind it. The free folk among them exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a wiry man named Hark, muttered that he had heard tales of dire wolves bigger than horses, mutated by the remnants of the army of the dead's magic. Another said they were ice bears, unstoppable once riled. They followed the tracks cautiously, though John suspected that if a dire wolf that large existed, Ghost would have sensed it in the old days. He missed his dire wolf companion, lost some time ago to the rigors of war. After another day and a half, they came upon a gory scene near a frozen ravine. Massive tufts of black scales, unmistakably from Drogon, lay scattered around a half-eaten carcass of a creature that defied simple description. It looked vaguely like a giant wolf but had a face elongated and twisted, with spines of bluish bone protruding from its back. Its limbs were singed, flesh peeled away where dragonfire had seared it. Whatever the thing was, it had been in a brutal fight with Drogon. Patches of dragon blood, thick, dark red, stained the snow, and deep gouges marked the ground where the dragon had lashed out. Yet no sign of Drogon himself remained, aside from those black scales and the trail of blood leading away. Davos stepped carefully around the carcass. Gods help us, what in the seven hells is that? A Night's Watch ranger knelt by the beast's remains. I've never seen anything like it, but it's definitely dead now. Looks like Drogon roasted it. The ranger pointed to the spines that jutted from the carcass. But it must have got some good blows in. Those spines are soaked in the dragon's blood. Jon's heart sank at the amount of blood on the ground. A mortal wound? Or something Drogon could yet survive? He scanned the edges of the ravine. Dark shapes of jagged ice loomed, tinted with the pinkish hue of twilight. We have to follow this trail, he said. If Drogon is alive and wounded, he'll be somewhere sheltered. The trail of blood was easy enough to follow, at least at first. They trudged across uneven terrain, descending into canyons where the wind died down but the cold pressed in all the more. Once or twice, the watchers pointed out scattered black shards, dragon scales, chipped away or shed in the fight. Then, just as they were about to lose the light, one of the free folk spotted a faint glow in the distance, a cave mouth hidden by a jutting shelf of ice. The glow seemed to flicker as if from a low-burning fire. Jon ordered the group to halt. He turned to Davos. Take half the men and circle around, see if there's another entrance. I'll approach from the front with the rest. Davos looked worried but nodded. Just don't do anything reckless. We didn't come all this way to watch you get roasted. Jon offered a tight smile, then motioned to the rangers and 3 others to follow him. Step by careful step they advanced. The cavern yawned wide, though inside it tapered into a narrower passage. A dull glow pulsed within, throwing dancing shadows on the icy walls. The smell of sulfur and char reached them, along with a curious heat that rolled out in waves, reminding Jon of the hidden cavern he had once seen where Drogon and those eggs lay. He pressed a hand against the cold, slick wall as he peered inside. About 20 paces in, the cavern opened into a larger chamber lit by glowing patches of molten rock or perhaps volcanic vents. Steam curled upward, condensing in the frigid air. And there, curled along one side of the chamber, lay Drogon, battered and bleeding. His once mighty black scales were torn in places, gashes across his flank revealing raw flesh. One wing was bent at an awkward angle, and his breathing came in heavy, ragged pulls. He seemed barely conscious, a low rumble echoing in his throat. The flickering light cast harsh shadows, making the dragon appear even more monstrous in his wounded state. Jon felt an involuntary surge of compassion. For all the terror Drogon had unleashed on King's Landing, for all the nightmares that still haunted the realm, Jon remembered him as a creature bound to Daenerys's longing for freedom. He remembered riding upon another dragon, regal, feeling the rush of wind and the bond that formed in that moment. Now, seeing Drogon so broken, he felt the press of guilt. He edged closer, signaling for his men to hang back. "Wait here," he whispered. Every step took him deeper into the chamber's heat, sweat pricking under his furs despite the icy air beyond. The stench of blood and burnt flesh grew stronger. Drogon's great head lay on the rocky floor, his side heaving. His eyes were half-lidded but snapped open at Jon's approach, revealing slitted pupils that glimmered with a mixture of pain and warning. A feeble growl rumbled through the cavern, sending tremors through the ground. Jon raised both hands, palms open, remembering the approach Daenerys once took. He wished she were here, wished she could quell Drogon's fury and ease his suffering. But she was gone. "It's me," Jon said softly, knowing the dragon had no reason to trust him. "I'm sorry you're hurt." He felt almost foolish speaking so gently to the colossal creature that could kill him with a single snap of its jaws, if it had the strength left. Drogon's eye rolled to focus on him. There was no recognition in that gaze, or perhaps there was a flicker. The beast let out a low, pained roar, as if to warn him away. Jon halted a short distance from those massive jaws, aware that a single lash of Drogon's tail could break every bone in his body. The dragon's breath was labored, emitting a sizzling heat that hissed against the icy floor. Blood pooled beneath its torn flank, steaming in the warmth of the vents. "If you attack, I'll defend myself," Jon murmured. "But I'd rather help." Behind him, one of the men shifted nervously. Another hissed caution. Jon ignored them, slowly drawing closer until he stood within a few strides of the dragon's snout. Drogon's pupils narrowed. The stench of sulfur was overwhelming. Jon took another step. No one else dared follow. A memory came unbidden, that final moment in the Red Keep's throne room, Daenerys's body limp in Jon's arms, Drogon's enraged roar shaking the foundations, the blast of dragon fire that had melted the Iron Throne into molten slag. Yet Drogon had chosen not to kill him. Some spark of connection, or perhaps confusion, had stayed the beast's fury. Jon hoped that spark remained, however faint. He sank to one knee, hand outstretched, ignoring the sweat sliding down his temples. "Easy," he murmured. "I don't want to fight you." With a painful growl, Drogon shifted, his tail scraping across the ground. His flanks rose and fell, the torn wing trembling. It seemed he lacked the strength to spew fire. Perhaps that was why Jon dared to do what he did next. He inched closer until his gloved hand gently touched the dragon's muzzle. The heat was intense, almost enough to sear leather. Drogon's eye widened. A thunderous rumble vibrated through the cavern. Jon braced himself for a sudden strike, but it didn't come. Instead, Drogon huffed, his breath sizzling against the floor, and slowly lowered his head. Jon exhaled shakily. "All right," he whispered. He turned to wave his men over. "We need to see if we can treat these wounds." Carefully. Davos, standing at the threshold of the chamber, looked as though he thought Jon was mad. But he and two others advanced, fear plain on their faces. They had brought some meager supplies, a few bandages, salves intended for human wounds, not dragon's flesh. Still, it was better than nothing. Drogon's injuries looked severe, and no ordinary healing would do. But maybe they could clean the wounds, stop the bleeding. They approached with caution, speaking in low tones. The great dragon did not stir except for a low hiss when they applied salve to a particularly deep gash. It occurred to Jon that even if they managed to stabilize Drogon, the question remained, how would he recover in this frozen wilderness, cut off from everything that might feed a creature of his size? While Davos and the others tended what they could, Jon looked around the chamber, searching for Tormund or any sign of the free folk who had come here. He found none, just small pockets of torn cloth at the cavern's edges as if someone had been here previously. Perhaps Tormund and his companions had fled after seeing Drogon in this state, or maybe the monstrous beasts had found them first. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crawled up Jon's spine. Then, without warning, a shout echoed from outside. Jon spun, hand on Longclaw's hill. One of the men who had stayed at the entrance called out, "Riders approaching." "Free folk, they're dragging someone." Jon hurried back toward the entrance, Davos at his side, leaving a few to continue tending Drogon. Outside, in the dull twilight, they saw a group of wildlings arriving on sturdy mounts. Their leader, a tall woman with braided red hair, raised a hand in greeting. Strapped to a makeshift sled behind her horse was a limp figure half covered in furs. As they drew closer, Jon recognized him, Tormund Giantsbane. Blood matted his hair, and a crude bandage wrapped around his shoulder. He looked half-frozen, near death. Jon and Davos ran to help. The wildling woman dismounted. "We found him near the Frostfangs. He said you might be here. We came as fast as we could." Jon knelt beside Tormund, clasping his friend's broad hand. Tormund's eyes flickered open, a pained grin twisting his bearded face. "About time you showed up, King Crow," he wheezed. "Thought I'd be feasting with the gods before you got here." Davos barked instructions for bandages and water. One of the men unwrapped Tormund's bandage, revealing a nasty wound that looked like a claw or bite mark, seeping blood. "We'll take you inside," Jon said, voice tight with concern. "We have some heat in there, and it's out of the wind." Tormund grunted in pain as they lifted him. "Watch the shoulder, you bloody kneelers." But his protest was more bark than bite. Carefully, they carried him into the cavern, laying him near one of the volcanic vents that radiated warmth. Tormund's eyes went wide when he saw Drogon lying against the far wall, though he managed a shaky laugh. "That's one big lizard you got there." Jon knelt beside him. "We need to know what happened. Are there more creatures out there?" "We found signs of a fight." Tormund grimaced, head lolling. "Me and my lot saw Drogon tangled with a pack of them devil wolves or whatever they are. Ice-spine beasts, maybe? Bastards. We're strong, near unstoppable. We tried to help, then realized we were outmatched. Dragon burned most of them, but not before they tore him up. We got separated and those beasts got a few of my men. We ran. I must have fallen in the chaos. Don't remember much else. Next thing I know, these folk found me. He closed his eyes, exhaling a ragged breath. We can't stay here, King Crow. Those things might come back. Jon glanced at the wounded dragon, then at Tormund. If they come, Drogon is in no shape to fight them off. Neither are we. One of the wildling scouts who had brought Tormund nodded gravely. We've seen more tracks. There could be a whole pack. A cave like this is shelter, but if they corner us inside, we're trapped. A desperate idea formed in Jon's mind. He looked at the battered dragon, the mangled wing. Could Drogon even fly now? If not, they were stuck with a wounded beast the size of a galleon. But if Drogon could still manage flight, even barely, perhaps they could guide him closer to the wall where the Night's Watch might help. The notion of walking a dragon on foot, half dead, through the frozen wilderness seemed impossible. Yet staying put was an invitation to be overrun. Davos seemed to guess his thoughts, leaning in to murmur, flying him out might be the only chance. But you'd have to, eh? Jon's throat constricted. The last time he tried to ride a dragon was on Regal, long ago, and that ended in chaos and heartbreak. But if Drogon still remembered how to let a Targaryen onto his back, if the pain of his wounds didn't drive him mad, maybe Jon could coax him into a short flight. It was madness. But this entire expedition was madness. We'll try a first light, Jon said, steeling himself. Gather your strength. We'll bandage Tormund as best we can. If those creatures come in the night, we'll fight them off with torches and dragonfire if Drogon can still breathe flame. The men and women around him exchanged uneasy glances but set to work. They built a small fire using scraps of dry tinder they had carried, distributing some precious rations. Tormund drifted in and out of consciousness as Davos tended his wound, cleaning it with boiled water. Drogon remained eerily still, though occasionally a low rumble reverberated in his chest, flaring the heat in the cavern. Jon tried to keep the dragon calm, speaking softly whenever it stirred. He had no illusions that Drogon's tolerance for him was infinite. The slightest provocation might set the creature off. Exhausted, they took turns resting in shifts. Jon could hardly sleep, his mind spinning with dread at what the morning might bring. In the middle of the night, he jolted awake to a faint noise, scratching at the ice outside, followed by growling. The men on watch raised torches, straining their ears. Every muscle in Jon's body tensed as he waited for an attack, but the noises soon faded into the distance. Perhaps the beasts were testing them, or merely wandering. No one slept well after that. At the break of dawn, a dull, pallid light seeped into the cavern. The cold pressed in as they extinguished the small fire and gathered their gear. Tormund, propped against the rocky wall, insisted he could stand, but when he tried, he nearly fell. With a curse, he allowed two wildlings to help him remain upright. Jon turned his attention to Drogon. The dragon's breathing was still labored, but some of the bleeding had slowed. Cautiously, Jon approached, speaking in a low tone. Drogon, we need to leave this place. I know you're hurting, but if we stay, we die. The beast shifted, letting out a wheeze that might have been a snarl or a pained groan. Jon ran a hand along the dragon's neck. He remembered the way Daenerys had calmed them with Valyrian commands. He wasn't fluent in that ancient tongue, but he whispered a few soothing words anyway, uncertain if Drogon would understand. Slowly, the dragon lurched, testing the wounded wing. The motion elicited a sharp roar of pain that shook the cavern. Several men stumbled back in alarm, but Jon stood firm, even as his heart hammered. Drogon glared at him, then tried again, stretching the wing. The membranes were torn, but not completely. Perhaps it could manage a short flight. Jon braced a hand on Drogon's shoulder. I'll ride you, he said, feeling somewhat foolish talking to the dragon as if it understood. But he had no other way. We'll go slowly, just enough to reach a safer place. Or near the wall. If you can't manage it, we'll find another way. The dragon responded with a low rumble. Was it assent or mere exhaustion? Either way, Jon had to try. He turned to the group. Gather anything flammable we have, torches, oil. If those beasts come, drive them back while we get Drogon airborne. Then follow me if you can. We'll find a vantage point for a safer camp. Davos shook his head as if Jon were insane. Are you sure about this? Jon managed a grim smile. No, but we have no choice. With that, he climbed atop Drogon's shoulder, gripping the jagged scales. The dragon twitched beneath him, and a fresh wave of fear coursed through Jon's veins. Memories of riding regal returned with a jolt, the exhilarating freedom and the terror of losing control. Gritting his teeth, he swung his leg over, settling where the ridges of Drogon's spine allowed a semblance of a seat. The creature let out a mighty exhale, steam pouring from its nostrils. Jon felt the enormous muscles bunch beneath him. This was no docile mount. It was a wounded predator, cornered and in pain. He pressed a hand against Drogon's neck. "Fly," he urged softly. "Fly, or we all die here." A tense moment stretched out, breath frozen in every pair of lungs in the cavern. Then Drogon let out a roar that resonated through the ice. He surged upright on unsteady legs, dislodging a few stones from the cave's walls. Snow and ice cascaded. The watchers scrambled aside, raising torches. Drogon lumbered forward, half walking, half dragging the injured wing. Jon clung to the scales, his teeth bared against the jostling. The mouth of the cave was barely large enough for a dragon of his size. With a furious shriek, Drogon squeezed through, cracking rock and sending shards tumbling. Finally, they burst into the open air, the bright whiteness of dawn nearly blinding. Drogon's wounded wing flapped weakly, the other beating at the air. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the creature would collapse. But the dragon hissed and beat both wings, lifting off the ground in a flurry of snow and wind. Jon felt the rush of air against his face, and he gripped the scales for dear life, mindful that a fall from even a small height could be lethal. Drogon managed to rise, unsteady but airborne, swirling clouds of snow beneath him. His roars echoed among the ice-crusted peaks. Below, Jon saw his companions scattering from the cave, weapons drawn, scanning the horizon for any sign of the monstrous beasts. Davos looked up, shielding his eyes. Jon knew he could not simply leave them behind. He needed to find a place where Drogon could land more safely, perhaps a cliff or a clearing. But the dragon, half-crazed with pain, seemed to have its own ideas. With each wing beat, the creature gained altitude. Jon's heart lodged in his throat. This was not the triumphant flight he had once experienced. It was a desperate, hobbling escape. The cold wind sliced across them, and Jon's eyes watered. He tried to guide Drogon, leaning in the direction of the wall, but the dragon's flight path wavered. Below, the bleak expanse of snow and ice stretched for miles, dotted with jagged rock formations. Jon caught a glimpse of movement, shadowy shapes slinking across the tundra. The beasts, perhaps, alerted by Drogon's roar. He prayed the others could hold them off or avoid them. Finally, after a few agonizing minutes, Drogon began to descend, trembling under the strain. Jon scanned the ground for a safe landing site and spotted a plateau of rock rising above the snowfield, somewhat sheltered by towering cliffs. It might do. He pressed closer to Drogon's neck, urging him downward. The dragon's flight wavered again, and they dropped sharply. A scream tore from Jon's throat as they plummeted toward the plateau, crashing in a spray of snow and gravel. The impact slammed him against Drogon's scales, rattling his bones. He managed not to be thrown free, though pain shot through his shoulder. Drogon sprawled on the plateau, gasping, body shaking from exertion. Jon slid off, stumbling in the snow, chest heaving. He looked over the dragon's battered form, fear washing through him. The wing was badly bent, blood seeping anew from the reopened wounds. Had Jon just forced Drogon to injure himself beyond healing? Anguish gripped him. He had never wanted to harm these creatures. He had not even wanted the throne that came with the Targaryen name. But here he was in the howling emptiness of the far north, miles from the wall, with a dying dragon at his side. He knelt by Drogon's head. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice thick. "I only wanted to save you." A low rumble vibrated through the dragon's throat, a sound that might have been fury or a faint acknowledgement. Drogon's massive eye focused on Jon, then slowly drifted shut, chest rising in labored pants. Snow swirled around them and the wind howled off the cliffs as if mourning the fate of the last great dragon. Jon felt a sting of tears in his eyes, though the cold wind nearly froze them. He needed shelter and he needed to find a way to rejoin his people. But Drogon was too large to move and clearly in no condition to fly again. Even if Jon had 1,000 men, how would they transport a dragon of this size through the wilderness? The best hope was to signal the Night's Watch. If ravens could be sent from Castle Black, maybe they had a chance to muster a large party with sleds, supplies, something that could help keep the dragon alive. But this plateau was far from the wall, and Jon had no means to call for aid but sending 1 or 2 men back on foot. He gazed into the empty sky as if hoping to see Regal or some other miraculous rescue. None came. The hush of the wild pressed in, broken only by Drogon's ragged breathing. Jon wondered, not for the first time, if it would have been better for the realm had dragons disappeared entirely. Yet he could not bring himself to believe that. Dragons were part of the natural order for all their destructive potential. Time blurred as he worked quickly, gathering what meager supplies remained in his saddlebag. He brushed snow away from Drogon's wounds, applying salves. The dragon jerked in pain, nearly crushing Jon with an inadvertent twitch, but settled again. The day wore on, sunlight reflecting off the snow. Jon's face burned from the glare. Hunger gnawed at him. He had only a little dried meat and a water skin. For Drogon, there was no suitable food at all, no way to feed a creature that size unless it hunted. But if it could not fly, it could not hunt. If it did not eat, how long could it survive? Toward dusk, Jon ventured to the edge of the plateau, peering across the frozen expanse. He thought he glimpsed figures in the distance, whether beast or man, he could not tell. The wind stirred fresh snow, obscuring his view. He felt utterly alone. The king of the 7 kingdoms stranded beyond the wall with a dying dragon, while monstrous creatures roamed and his loyal companions were out there somewhere, threatened by the same danger. That night, he huddled in a makeshift shelter beneath a rocky overhang, with Drogon's bulk partially blocking the wind. The dragon occasionally let out low growls in its sleep, exhaling blasts of warm breath that offered some respite from the freezing air. Jon dozed fitfully, haunted by dreams of the Iron Throne dissolving under dragonfire and Daenerys' face contorted in sorrow. He dreamed of Sansa's pleas for him to return, of Tyrion's cynicism, of Brienne's unwavering loyalty. Always, he woke to the cruel cold of the real night, his body shivering, heart pounding. At dawn, he discovered Drogon awake, black eyes following him as he stirred from his cramped sleeping role. The dragon seemed weaker, but calmer. Jon approached to check the wounds, speaking in soft tones. "We have to get you help. If you can't fly, I'll find a way to bring the help to you." He realized it was madness. No ordinary rescue party could handle this. But perhaps the Night's Watch had ties with the free folk who might help. Perhaps supplies could be sent from Winterfell. If Drogon could be stabilized, maybe with enough time and rest. A roar suddenly shattered the still morning. Not from Drogon, but from somewhere in the distance. Jon spun toward the edge of the plateau. The cry was deep, resonant. More like a lion's roar than a wolf's howl, but with a sharper pitch. Could it be one of the monstrous beasts that fought Drogon? The wind carried another roar, this one answering. Then silence. Jon sensed movement beyond the rocky outcroppings, shadows in the swirling snow. He rushed to gather his sword and prepared for an attack. Minutes passed in tense waiting. Drogon lifted his head, nostrils flaring, as though scenting the air. He let out a warning hiss. Jon stepped closer to the dragon, heart hammering. If they were besieged by a pack of those creatures, there was little chance either of them would survive. Jon had only Longclaw and a handful of dragonglass daggers. Drogon could still breathe fire, Jon hoped, but the injuries might limit how effectively. They braced themselves as silhouettes emerged through the haze. A band of a dozen figures came into view. At first, Jon feared they were the beasts, but as they drew closer, he saw they were humans, free folk, from the look of their pelts and rough gear. Jon's mind whirled. The group halted a safe distance away, staring at the wounded dragon with expressions of awe, fear, and maybe fascination. One of them stepped forward cautiously, a tall man with braided hair and a missing ear. He raised his hands to show he bore no weapon. Jon lowered his sword to his side, not wanting to provoke them. "I'm Jon," he called, voice echoing. "Jon Targaryen. We mean no harm. The dragon is wounded." The tall man continued forward until he was within speaking range. "We heard rumors a dragon was fighting beasts in the Frostfangs. We came to see if the tales were true." His gaze flicked from John to Drogon, grimacing at the sight of fresh blood in the snow. He looks half dead. John nodded, gripping Longclaw tight. He is. I need help. Food. A way to get him somewhere safer. The wildlings behind the tall man exchanged glances. John sensed their hesitation. Helping a dragon was no small feat, and they had families of their own to worry about. But the tall man finally replied, "We have a camp not far from here. Meat's scarce, but we can spare some. We also have a few ice sleds. If you can help us with the beasts that prowl this land, maybe we can help you keep your dragon alive. I don't speak for everyone, but you are the King Crow who once united us. Some remember your deeds." Relief and gratitude warred with caution in John's heart. "I'll do what I can," he said. "Those creatures are a threat to us all. If Drogon recovers enough to hunt them or drive them away, that's our best chance." The man nodded. "My name is Varric. We'll show you to our camp, but the dragon, he can't walk like a man. How will we move him?" John turned to Drogon, who stared back with a baleful eye. "He'll have to manage something, or we'll have to bring supplies here." He paused, thinking of Tormund, Davos, and the rest of his party. "Others came with me. They're somewhere south of here, near a cavern. They might be in danger. If you can send a search party..." Varric motioned to two of his people. "We'll do what we can." The men set off at once, disappearing into the snow, presumably to track John's companions. The rest gathered in a loose circle around Drogon, giving the dragon a wide berth. John explained Drogon's condition as best he could, while Varric and a few others sized up the tears in the dragon's wing and the bites across its flank. Mutters passed among them. Some thought it best to put the beast out of its misery rather than watch it suffer and risk attracting more predators. But others pointed out that a living dragon could be an ally against these monstrous creatures. Over the next few days, this uneasy alliance formed the basis of a desperate survival strategy. The Free Folk camp was situated in a sheltered valley not far from the plateau, accessible by a steep path. They improvised a series of sleds and ramps to move Drogon in short increments, never letting him strain too much. John worked tirelessly alongside them, using pulleys and raw muscle to shift the dragon's bulk. Drogon roared and hissed in pain, but the combined effort of more than 24 wildlings eventually coaxed him into the valley, where a series of hot springs offered some warmth in the brutal cold. There, they fashioned a crude enclosure by piling up stones and ice blocks, giving the dragon a place to rest that was not fully exposed to the wind. Each night, John half expected Drogon to unleash fury at his captors, but the dragon was too weak. Instead, he accepted small offerings of meat from the wildlings, scaring them half to death when he snapped at the chunks of flesh. It was nowhere near enough food for a beast that size, but it kept him alive. Gradually, some of the lesser wounds began to close. Meanwhile, John learned more about the monstrous creatures. Varric's people described them as frost-spine devils, wolves twisted by some unknown magic or leftover essence of the undead. They often hunted in packs, showing uncanny intelligence. The wildlings believed there were a few such packs roaming beyond the wall, but until recently they had stayed deeper in the frost fangs. Something was driving them closer to human camps, perhaps hunger or a new alpha among them. If Drogon recovered enough to drive them off, it might save more than just this camp. John found his thoughts turning to the rest of his party. He worried for Davos and Tormund, especially Tormund's injuries. He also worried about the realm, about King's Landing left in the hands of Tyrion and Brienne with Sansa further north. Yet duty bound him here. He could not leave Drogon. If he abandoned the dragon, it would almost certainly die. And if that happened, the last living remnant of Daenerys's dream would vanish. On the 5th day since meeting the wildlings, a small group arrived, escorting none other than Davos and Tormund. John rushed to greet them at the edge of the valley, relief pouring through him when he saw they were alive. Tormund leaned on a makeshift crutch, his face pale but defiant. Davos looked exhausted, a bandage wrapped around his forearm. They embraced, ignoring the freezing wind. "Bloody hell," Davos muttered. "We thought you were dead for sure when we saw Drogon take off. Spent days dodging those beasts, only to find these wildlings who said you were camped here with the dragon. Could hardly believe it." Tormund bellowed a laugh, though it turned into a wince. "King Crow at it again, taming dragons and wildlings like it's nothing. Good to see you alive, John." John gripped their shoulders. "Likewise. Thank the gods." He led them to where Drogon rested, explaining the plan to nurse him back to health if possible. Davos regarded the dragon with wide eyes. "And here I thought I was done with impossible tasks. Well, I've never known you to give up, your grace." They soon realized the situation remained dire. Food was scarce, the wildling stores near depletion. They needed hunting parties to seek game, but the frost-spine devils prowled. The forests. A war with these creatures loomed unless they could be driven off, and Drogon was still too weak for a direct confrontation. Jon debated sending Davos and Tormund back to the wall to muster help, but the distance was considerable and the journey perilous. Tormund insisted he would go, but his wound was not fully healed. Davos similarly volunteered, though he was no ranger. In the end, Jon decided to lead the fight himself with a handful of the bravest wildlings, while Davos remained to coordinate the camp's defenses with the rest. In the days that followed, Jon and his scouting parties ventured out to track the devils. They encountered small packs, engaging in skirmishes. Dragonglass blades proved somewhat effective, as the beasts seemed partially infused with the same unnatural energy that once animated the whites. Fire also drove them away, though they were alarmingly resistant to normal steel. By each evening, Jon's band returned to the camp, battered and weary, hoping Drogon's health improved enough to be of real help. Slowly, the dragon seemed to gain some strength. He devoured any meat they brought back, deer, goats, even the flesh of the devils they managed to kill, though it tasted foul. His wounds scabbed over, and there were moments he tested his flame breath, scorching the ground in front of him. Still, the devils grew bolder. One night, they ambushed the camp, slinking in from all sides. Shouts erupted as the wildlings scrambled for spears and torches. Jon raced toward the perimeter, yelling orders, but it was chaos in the flickering firelight. He caught sight of a monstrous shape bounding over a low wall of snow. Longclaw flashed, severing the beast's forepaw. It shrieked, rearing back, spines rattling. Another leapt from the darkness, knocking Jon to the ground. He struggled against the creature's snapping jaws, managing to wedge the blade between its ribs. Its breath was cold, reeking of decay. Blood spattered across the snow as it collapsed, but more howls filled the air. Roars thundered behind him. Suddenly, flame lit up the night. Drogon, battered but furious, unleashed a streak of dragon fire, sweeping it across the camp's outskirts. The devils howled in agony as the inferno consumed them. A savage burst of orange and red flared in the darkness, sending shadows dancing across the valley walls. Jon rolled aside, barely avoiding the heat. He looked up to see Drogon standing, wings spread, releasing another torrent of flame. The ground shook with the dragon's rage. Though the devils were fierce, they could not withstand the fury of a recovering dragon. The survivors fled into the night, tails tucked, spines singed. Wildlings cheered, though the celebration was tinged with sorrow for those who had fallen in the attack. Jon rushed to help the wounded, barking orders for water and bandages. He spotted Davos limping through the wreckage, helping a wildling woman who had taken a nasty bite to the leg. Tormund, propped against a spear, hollered insults at the retreating beasts. In the aftermath, the camp realized Drogon's power was returning. He was not fully healed, and flight remained a struggle, but he could move, breathe fire, and defend himself. The devils would likely regroup, but for the moment they had a respite. The wildlings recognized that so long as the dragon was on their side, the tide of this strange war might turn in their favor. Eventually, scouts reported the largest pack had retreated to a glacial canyon not far away. Their leader, a monstrous alpha with a mane of ice-encrusted spines, was rumored to be the size of a small horse. If they destroyed the alpha, the pack might scatter. Jon conferred with Davos, Tormund, and Varric. Drogon was strong enough to fight, but not to chase the creatures for miles. The only option was a direct confrontation at the canyon, forcing the devils to defend their den. At first light, they gathered every capable fighter, armed with dragonglass-tipped spears and torches. Drogon lumbered along, still limping on one leg, but radiating lethal menace. Snow fell in thick flurries as they reached the canyon. An eerie silence reigned, broken only by the distant drip of melting ice. Then they heard the growls, echoing. The devils emerged from crevices, eyes gleaming blue-white, spines bristling. Their alpha appeared atop a ridge of ice, snarling with a voice like a grinding glacier. Its maw dripped with frozen saliva, and the spines along its back shimmered in the half-light. Jon shouted a command to hold. Drogon reared his head, black scales glinting. With a deafening roar, the dragon unleashed a column of flame, sweeping it across the devils. They scattered, shrieking in primal fury. The alpha bounded down from the ridge, launching itself at Drogon's flank. Jon bellowed for the spearmen to move in. The wildlings charged, thrusting dragonglass points at the smaller beasts that rushed them from the sides. Snarls and roars filled the air, accompanied by the clang of steel and the crackle of fire. Tormund, braced on his good leg, impaled a devil that lunged for him. Davos held the line with a group of wildlings, fending off a pair of snarling creatures. Jon joined them, swinging Longclaw in precise arcs, each strike honed by years of battle. Between the dragonfire overhead and the savage close-quarters combat on the ground, the canyon erupted into chaos. Ice cracked beneath them, sections of the canyon walls collapsing under the intense heat. The Alpha reached Drogon, raking its claws across the dragon's wounded flank. Drogon bellowed in pain, slamming his tail around. The Alpha was knocked back but quickly regained its footing, crouching for another attack. Jon saw the opening. He sprinted across the churned snow, leaping onto a ledge of ice to get above the Alpha. With a fierce cry, he hurled himself downward, plunging Longclaw into the creature's neck. The Alpha howled, thrashing wildly. Claws tore at Jon's side, but he kept his grip, forcing the blade deeper until he felt a snap of bone. Blood, dark and cold, spurted onto the ice. Drogon seized the moment. The dragon swung his head around and blasted the Alpha with a torrent of flame. Flames engulfed man and beast alike. Jon felt the scorching heat lick at his furs, and he yanked the sword free, rolling away just in time to avoid being cooked. The Alpha shrieked, flesh bubbling, before collapsing into a twisted, burning heap. Jon lay panting in the snow, face blistering from the intense heat, side bleeding from claw marks. But the Alpha was dead. Around them, the remaining devils faltered, confusion ripping through their ranks. Some tried to continue the fight, only to be cut down by spears or incinerated by Drogon's next blast of flame. Others fled, scattering into the cracks and crannies of the canyon. The wildlings whooped in triumph, though the cost had been high. Bodies of their brethren dotted the battlefield, along with the scorched remains of the devils. Drogon sank to his haunches, trembling from exertion, breath coming in ragged gasps. Jon slowly got to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side, and stumbled toward the dragon. Together, they had won a desperate battle in a forgotten corner of the world. Panting, Jon leaned his forehead against Drogon's scales, feeling the dragon's shudders. They were both hurt, but alive. The Alpha was no more, and with luck, the pack would scatter or dwindle, no longer a threat to these people. Davos and Tormund soon reached Jon, helping him stand when his knees threatened to give out. The old smuggler grimaced at Jon's wounded side. "You're cut up something fierce, your grace. We need to get you seen to before you bleed out or freeze." Jon nodded weakly. His vision swam. "Let's make sure Drogon's stable." Tormund barked a soft laugh. "The big lizard will live. You, on the other hand, need stitches." Exhaustion weighed heavily, but Jon allowed them to guide him back to the camp, Drogon following at a slow gait. That night, they tended their wounded, burned the dead devils, and offered simple rites for the fallen wildlings. Jon's wounds were dressed with poultices, and he collapsed into feverish sleep. For 3 days he drifted in and out of consciousness, nightmares swirling in his mind. Images of Daenerys, the Iron Throne melting, the devil's snarls. When he finally awoke lucid, Tormund stood by his bedside, grinning. "Look who finally decided to join us in the land of the living." Jon struggled to sit up, pain racking his side. "What news? Drogon. Is he?" "He's alive," Tormund said. "Flying yet? No, but strong enough to walk around the valley, scaring the deer. These folk are calling him their guardian against the devils." Jon let out a ragged breath of relief. "And the devils?" Tormund shrugged. "Scattered. A few roam in smaller packs, but the biggest threat is gone. Varric's men are patrolling. They owe you a debt, King Crow, fighting alongside them, saving their families. You might be the first crow they've ever toasted with real gratitude." Jon offered a faint, pained smile. His mind drifted to the realm beyond this frozen corner. How many weeks had passed since he left King's Landing? Would Tyrion be fending off conspiracies, or dealing with the Pentoshi envoys pressing for an answer? Would the lords of the realm fear their king had vanished again, as he once did when he joined the Night's Watch. Within another week, he was able to walk with support. Winter sunlight sparkled on the snow, and the valley's hot springs sent curls of steam into the air. Drogon, though still bearing scars and a limp, at least no longer seemed on the brink of death. He greeted Jon's approach with a rumble that might have been acceptance. Carefully, Jon slid a hand over the dragon's scales. "We did it," he murmured. "But we need to get home now." That home was not in question. The realm needed him, and he realized, with a pang of longing, that King's Landing was indeed home now, because it was where his duty lay. He hoped to bring Drogon south, at least as far as the Wall, though the idea of leading a dragon through the north once again was daunting. The Free Folk were willing to help, having formed a surprising bond with this monstrous ally. They scouted a path that might accommodate Drogon's size, charting routes along frozen rivers and shallow passes. If the dragon recovered enough to manage short flights, they could bypass the worst obstacles. Jon's next challenge was forging a plan to reintroduce a living dragon into a realm still shaken by the memory of King's Landing's destruction. He had no desire to let fear and old hatred spark another riot. But what other choice did he have? Leave Drogon here to fend for himself, or risk letting him vanish into myth, possibly to die alone in the wilderness? No. He would bring Drogon to the Wall, station watchers to ensure the dragon did not threaten towns or small folk. A precarious arrangement, but perhaps, in time, trust could be rebuilt. When Jon finally led the expedition south, it felt surreal. The wildlings parted ways, though a handful stayed on to help guide Drogon. Davos rode at Jon's side, Tormund in a cart behind them, cursing the slow pace. Drogon ambled, wings folded, sending up gusts of snow with each stride. It was like a traveling caravan, but with a dragon as the main passenger. Weeks passed, the land shifting from barren tundra to the outskirts near the Wall. They encountered few obstacles. Most living creatures fled at Drogon's approach. At last, the mighty ice rampart came into view. The men of the Night's Watch looked upon the returning king with awe, especially when they saw the dragon trailing behind. Some panicked, but Jon quickly assured them that Drogon was under control, or as controlled as a dragon could be. Castle Black had never been designed to host a dragon, but they cleared a stretch of open ground outside the gates, constructing a large pen with reinforced stakes and thick chains. Jon insisted the chains be minimal, only enough to deter Drogon if he grew aggressive. He hoped to rely on the dragon's limited flight and a supply of game from the nearby forests. It was not ideal, but it was better than letting Drogon roam unwatched, risking conflict with villages. Tormund, once recovered, would return to the Free Folk to keep the lines of communication open. As Jon prepared to continue his journey south to Winterfell, sorrow tugged at him. He would leave Drogon here, at least for a time, to heal fully and become accustomed to new surroundings. Each day, Jon spent an hour or more near the dragon's enclosure, speaking softly, ensuring the Watchers treated Drogon with caution but not cruelty. The memory of Daenerys lingered, reminding him of what she had once hoped for, a united realm, guided by compassion. He tried to honor that memory now by saving the last of her children rather than letting him die in a land of ice. At last, the day came for Jon to depart Castle Black. Tormund, leaning on his crutch, cracked a grin. "Guess you'll be going back to your fancy throne at King Crow? Don't forget about us up here. We've got your dragon to watch over." Jon clasped arms with him. "I won't forget. If Drogon gets restless or something goes wrong, send word immediately. And if the Frostspine devils show up again..." Tormund smacked his chest. "We'll deal with them. This is our home. Besides, the big lizard will keep them away, I reckon." Jon bowed his head in farewell to the wildlings who had come to see him off. Then, with Davos and a small escort, he rode south. The northern air welcomed him, though each mile reminded him that the realm's burdens waited. In Winterfell, Sansa greeted him with a mixture of relief and exasperation, scolding him for nearly getting himself killed again. He endured her lecture with a faint smile, noticing the worry lines at her brow. She told him that ravens from King's Landing carried news of mounting frustrations. The Pentoshi envoys demanded an audience, the lords were restless, the city watch was anxious about the king's absence. Jon's presence was required urgently. He took only a brief respite at Winterfell, just long enough to recover some strength and assure Sansa that the devils beyond the wall had been dealt with, that Drogon was alive but contained. Then he set off once more, determined to return to the capital. Despite his exhaustion, a surge of resolve carried him forward. He had faced the devils of the far north, mended a wounded dragon, and reunited with a measure of the free folk. Now he would confront the devils of the south, political intrigue, marriage proposals, lords who questioned his rule, knowing that his duty did not end simply because the realm was nominally at peace. The roads south were clearer than he recalled, a testament to the rebuilding projects that had taken root under his rule. Fields had begun to sprout fresh growth, villagers worked the land, and the small towns bustled with cautious optimism. John traveled under a simple banner, refusing grand processions. He spoke with locals along the way, hearing concerns about bandits or taxes, offering what solutions he could. Word of his approach spread quickly, and by the time he neared King's Landing, throngs gathered to catch a glimpse of the king returned from the frozen edge of the world. Some hailed him as the Dragon King who tamed the North's monsters, others eyed him with suspicion, recalling the tales of Dragonfire. At the city gates, the gold cloak stood at attention. Bells rang from towers to announce his arrival, though John winced at the memory of another day when bells had tolled in King's Landing. Tyrion, Brienne, and members of the small council awaited him in the courtyard of the Red Keep, bowing as he dismounted. He saw relief on Tyrion's face and something like quiet gratitude on Brienne's. Tyrion stepped forward. "Your Grace, I'm pleased to see you in one piece. I only half believed the rumors that you'd gone to wrestle monsters with your bare hands." John sighed. "We did what we had to do. How is the city?" Tyrion's expression grew wry. "Better, and yet complicated. The Pentoshi envoys have threatened to leave if you don't grant them an audience. A few lords have been feuding over shipping rights. Bronn says we owe him more gold for certain trade deals. And half the court thinks you died and are now a resurrected wight, which I've found impossible to disprove to everyone's satisfaction." John gave a weak chuckle. "I'm alive. That's all they need to know. We'll sort it out." They led him into the Red Keep, along hallways that felt strangely warm after the biting cold of the north. Servants rushed about, some pausing to bow. John felt his wounds ache, but he refused to rest until he had at least spoken with his council. They repaired to the same chamber where they normally convened, the tapestry behind his seat showing the stark silhouette of a dire wolf and dragon intertwined. By lamplight, John recounted the events beyond the wall in succinct detail, explaining Drogon's location and the measures taken to ensure safety. Tyrion's gaze sharpened. "A live dragon within range of the wall. Some lords will be alarmed, but others might see opportunity. We should be prepared for all sorts of rumors. And if our finances remain tight, a dragon might become a tempting bargaining chip, though I doubt you'd ever allow that." John's voice hardened. "He's not a bargaining chip. Anyone who tries to exploit him will answer to me." Brienne bowed her head. "What would you have us do, Your Grace?" "Keep the realm informed that Drogon is recovering beyond the wall under watch. He's not a threat as long as he's left in peace. We have more pressing matters. The well-being of the people, the reconstruction, and the simmering tensions among the lords." John settled into his chair, exhaustion tugging at his bones. "Tell me everything." They spoke late into the night. Tyrion listed each brewing conflict: harbor taxes, trade disagreements, a few minor rebellions in the Westerlands. Davos, who had accompanied John south, offered solutions for maritime issues. Brienne reported on the city watch's restructuring. Lord Royce had returned to the Vale, but his seat on the council was kept open. The Pentoshi envoys demanded a decision on the marriage proposal, presenting a formidable array of economic benefits should John accept. Meanwhile, a rumor still persisted that a hidden Targaryen heir lurked in Essos, though no evidence had emerged. John, drained from the journey, found his mind drifting in and out of focus. He wanted only to bathe, to rest, to let the weight of the crown slip off his brow. But he forced himself to remain present. The final topic was inevitably the matter of his own marriage. Tyrion folded his hands. "We can't delay this forever, Your Grace. The lords talk, the people speculate. Stability is at stake. Do you have any inclination, any preference?" Memories of his expedition, of near-death battles, and the dragon's wounds made the courtly games of marriage feel distant and surreal. But he recognized the need. John exhaled. "I have no wish to wed a stranger merely for advantage. If I must marry, let it be someone who understands what we're trying to build, someone with empathy. If the Pentoshi envoys can offer a match that doesn't treat me like a pawn, I'll speak to them. But I refuse to bind myself to a loveless bargain that might sow more discord." Tyrion inclined his head. "Very well. I'll arrange a private meeting. We'll see if they're genuine or simply eager to harness the Targaryen name." Thus began a new chapter of Jon's rule, fraught not with open war but with the subtler battles of diplomacy, alliances, and the constant balancing act required to maintain Peace in a kingdom still healing from old wounds. He faced it all with weary determination, the memories of the far north fresh in his mind. He thought often of Drogon, caged by ice and watchful swords, and wondered if the day would come when the dragon flew freely again over a realm not ruled by fear. He thought of Daenerys, her dreams turned to ashes. He thought of Sansa, forging her own path in the north, and Arya, lost to the distant horizons of the west. As the weeks went by, one bright morning found Jon standing on a balcony overlooking King's Landing. The city stretched toward the sea, its rooftops dappled in early sunlight. A breeze ruffled his cloak. He leaned against the balustrade, letting his tired eyes roam across the place he called home. He reflected on all that had happened. His journey beyond the wall, the improbable rescue of a wounded dragon, the uncertain fate of monsters in the far north. The realm had known so much bloodshed, and yet, in pockets like that wildling camp, or in the revived farmland outside the city, there were green shoots of hope. Behind him, footsteps approached. He turned to see Tyrion with a letter in hand. "Good news or bad?" Jon asked, bracing himself. Tyrion's expression was ambiguous. "A bit of both, I suppose. We've received an offer from Pentos that is rather surprising. They've proposed a match between you and one of their Magister's younger relations, but with conditions that might be more flexible than usual. They're talking about a trade alliance that could infuse the crown's coffers with enough gold to address many of our rebuilding needs. They also claim their Magister's daughter is well-educated, philanthropic, and sympathetic to your goals." Jon arched an eyebrow. "Sympathetic to my goals, or eager to become queen?" Tyrion smirked. "Possibly both. But from what we've heard, she's no fool. Nor is she desperate for a crown at the cost of her own freedom. She apparently insisted she'd only marry if it meant genuine cooperation, not subjugation. It might be worth at least meeting her." Jon gazed out over the city once more, the gulls circling over the harbor. "All right," he said quietly. "Arrange the meeting, but no decisions until I'm sure this is right for the realm, and for me." And so it went, the days turning into weeks as Jon navigated the labyrinth of politics, uncertain alliances, personal desires, and the burden of his vow to protect the kingdom. He could still feel the cold of the far north in his bones, reminding him that threats could arise from unexpected places. He could still hear Drogon's roar echoing in his memories, a reminder of the power he carried in his blood and the legacy that both haunted and inspired him. But he pressed on, guided by a conscience as unyielding as northern ice, forging a new future for Westeros one careful step at a time. His story was far from over. There would be more trials, more heartbreak, and perhaps moments of joy. But for now, King Jon Targaryen, still Jon Snow to those who truly knew him, stood resolute on the precipice of yet another unknown. He had chosen a path of service over conquest, a crown of hammered steel over a polished golden one, and compassion over tyranny. In a realm once torn apart by ambition, that choice itself was a quiet revolution, a promise that the better angels of a king's nature could, sometimes, prevail. And for as long as he drew breath, he would keep that promise, even if the entire weight of the Seven Kingdoms pressed upon him like a never-lifting winter sky.